Sharon, who doesn't like nicknames. How did she know? She's interacted with Miss Sharon before. Upon hearing Rionette Tinniker's answer, Klein was first taken aback before questions emerged one after another in his mind. From his point of view, a messenger and a mailer wouldn't communicate under normal circumstances. The entire process would be the messenger's appearance, the retrieval of the letter, and its departure. Besides, when did Miss Messenger need to obtain the permission of the other party when she gives nicknames? Did Frank Lee and Patrick Bryan agree to it? A few seconds later, Klein instinctively had a guess. Miss Messenger and Miss Sharon definitely had some kind of connection, and Rionette Tinniker didn't wish to hide anything. Reining in his thoughts, Klein opened the envelope, unfolded the letter, and quickly scanned the contents. There's something I hope you can help me with. Let's meet at the Bravehearts bar to discuss in detail. Compared to before, Miss Sharon isn't that stingy with her words. She's slightly improved in this aspect for the better. Is this a change that resulted from a demigod advancement? Klein thought for a moment and walked to his desk. Picking up a pen, he wrote, "When do you wish to meet?" Putting down his pen, he glanced at Rionette Tinniker, who was standing by the side, seemingly waiting to write the reply. Klein felt even more certain again. He folded the letter, handed it over, and casually said, "For Miss Sharon." One of Rionette Tinniker's heads bit on the letter while the remaining three said, "You haven't paid." "No, postage, payment." Klein cleared his throat, took out a gold coin, and handed it to Miss Messenger. Seeing Rionette Tinniker disappear, he revealed a pensive look as he walked to the reclining chair and waited patiently. Less than a minute later, Miss Messenger walked out of the void again in her complicated dress. She was biting the letter from before. Klein didn't inquire as he received the reply letter and unfolded it. "If you don't have any problems with it, it would be best if it happens tonight." "Tonight?" Klein nodded thoughtfully and flicked his wrist, causing the letter to ignite into scarlet flames, quickly turning it black. The flame burgeoned and enveloped his body as well. By the time the flames extinguished, Klein's figure had already disappeared from the reclining chair. The floating ashes hovering in midair automatically fell into a nearby trash can with the help of an invisible wind. In the houses that were connected together in Backlands North Borough, Sherwood Borough, and the bridge area, the wall gas lamps brightened slightly before returning to normal. Before long, Klein appeared in a room he had privately rented at the periphery of East Borough. He changed his clothes, put on gold-rimmed glasses, and went out with the appearance of Sherlock Moriarty, heading straight for the Bravehearts bar. This time, he didn't seek out Ian, who was in the card room playing tabletop games with a bunch of people. He listened for a few seconds before pushing open the door to one of the billiard rooms and entered slowly. Just as he flipped open the door, he saw figures outlining themselves on two sides. Sitting on a high stool to the left was the blonde, blue-eyed Sharon. She was wearing an exquisite bonnet and a regal dress. Compared to the past, her face was no longer as pale as before. It just looked like she was anemic, making her look less like a female ghost and more like a doll. Standing to the right of the billiard table was Marie. This young man who liked to play cards with zombies had turned increasingly pale. The malice in his eyes had become unobvious, but it gave a suppressive feeling to others. "Good evening." Klein took off his hat with a smile and bowed. "Good evening, Mr. Detective." Sharon's body seemed to float up weightlessly as she seriously bowed. Marie did the same. At that moment, the billiard room seemed to be filled with paranormal events. Klein casually pulled a high stool chair and sat down. He chuckled and said, "What is it this time?" "I'm very sorry to trouble you again." Sharon bowed again. Marie quickly said, "We made an agreement for a cooperative effort with the Sanguine to deal with the key members of the Rose School of Thought in Backland. We will definitely carry out the bulk of it ourselves. It will include how we lure them out, how we ambush them, and how our attack will happen. We just hope that you will watch the entire process by the side and aid in our escape when an accident happens. If you want anything, just mention it. We can discuss it. That is to say, I'm a contingency to prevent any accidents. What if that fellow, Emlyn, also enlists the world to secretly help? When that happens, they would have two demigods in their contingency plans. I think it might work. I can be Sherlock Moriarty while letting Conas Kilgore be Gairman Sparrow." Klein considered for a few seconds without immediately agreeing. Instead, he said, "Let me ask a few questions." Marie glanced at Sharon and nodded. "Okay." Klein looked at Sharon, who was sitting on a high stool like a doll. "The Tutensis 2 mummy we previously obtained was a preparation for you to advance to Sequence 4 puppet, and you've already become a demigod. This was something he had previously learned from their conversations and letter exchanges. His main goal was to make a confirmation and start the subsequent topic. Sharon quietly looked back at him as she said with an ethereal and inhuman voice, "Yes." Klein nodded slightly and directly asked, "What's your relationship with Rionette Tineke?" Sharon's blue eyes darted about almost indecimably as she said, "She is my teacher." Teacher. She. Although Klein already had some guesses, he nearly drew a gasp. He felt his head aching. In the blink of an eye, although his expression remained the same, countless thoughts were bubbling in his mind. Miss Messenger was originally an angel. I'm actually using an angel as a messenger. Isn't that too exaggerated? She is even Miss Sharon's teacher. It probably wasn't that simple when she requested to be my messenger. From the looks of it, she definitely isn't on the same side as the Mother Tree of Desire. Miss Messenger signed the contract with me because the Mother Tree of Desire was coveting me. No, that she is bound to be my enemy. It's no wonder Miss Sharon was able to obtain the puppet potion formula and the corresponding ingredients with the help of her teacher. As his thoughts raced, Klein decided to ask another question. He wanted to use the process of Miss Sharon's or Marie's replies to calm his emotions. He deliberated and said, "What's the exact situation?" This time, it was still Sharon replying. Compared to Haramek's mechanical dolls, she appeared more lifeless as she calmly said, "Early in the Fifth Epoch, death perished. There was resistance stirring against the Balam Empire in places like the southern continent's Star Highlands and Paz Valley. During this process, the Chained God appeared, and the Rose School of Thought was born. My teacher was originally the daughter of the ruler of the local highlands, but she later became the Blessed of the Chained God, assisting her father in establishing the Highlands Kingdom. Later on, she became a Sequence 2 angel, one of the leaders of the Rose School of Thought. She advocated temperance and using austere and few desires to resist the madness in life. About 922 years ago, the Son of God, Sua, was born. Everything began to change as the indulgence and bloody rituals gradually took over the dominating faction. At first, Teacher was barely able to maintain it, preventing the temperance faction from being affected. However, as time passed, the influence of the Mother Tree of Desire grew. Sua also successfully advanced a few years ago, becoming a true abomination. An internal war broke out. Teacher protected us as we escaped from the highlands, valley, and grasslands. I watched her fall under the siege of Sua and the other high-ranking members. However, she didn't completely die because of prior preparations. She resurrected in a special state in the spirit world and now yearns to complete her body. Is that so? In other words, Miss Messenger is currently, in essence, an angel without the corresponding powers. She is in a weakened state. It's no wonder she wasn't able to easily deal with the Rose School of Thought demigod, Shanks. Wait, although there are many angels cooperating with me, why are they all incomplete or weak? Apart from Ma'am Ariana, all of them are in such states. Mr. Azik, Palais Zoroast, Will Orsepton, Miss Messenger. Is there a problem with my title as the Fool? Are they all waiting for me to give them the charms corresponding to Scholar of Yore? Klein came to a realization as he felt rather poignant. He didn't ask why Rionette Tineke still desired money, as he thought for a moment before saying, "Miss Sharon, the Rose School of Thought definitely has no lack of the puppet potion formula. After you obtained the Tutansis II mummy, they would likely view you as a demigod." In addition, Ma'am Rionette Tineke had once appeared before the Rose School of Thought's demigod and engaged in a battle with them. This also means that the Rose School of Thought definitely knows that she is alive, and they wouldn't not be prepared against her. And your relationship as master and disciple with her is no secret to them. In such a situation, isn't it a little too naive to use yourself and Marie as bait to fish out the key members of the Rose School of Thought in Backland? Do you think they will only send 1 or 2 demigods to deal with you? Up to what degree of help can the Sanguine provide? Also, I previously mentioned that due to one of my identities, the Mother Tree of Desire places a great deal of importance on me. Even Abomination Sua was sent to attack me. And your teacher's cooperation with me is something they are similarly aware of. Summarizing all these points, if you and Marie appear, the kind of assault you would invite is unpredictable. Having said that, Klein's expression turned serious as he asked, "Do you wish to cause a divine descent in Backland?" The entire billiard room instantly turned abnormally quiet, but there weren't any changes to Sharon's expression. After a few seconds, Sharon calmly replied to Klein, "It's not bait, but a ploy to lure him out." Just as Klein was about to ask what the difference was, Marie explained in detail. Back when we were pursued by the Rose School of Thought, we discovered that they had quite a number of members in Backland. However, due to our lack of strength and our fear of traps, as well as to not attract the attention of the church, we didn't take any action against them. This time, we plan on attacking one of the more important ones. We'll deliberately miss some out, allowing the hidden ones to secretly escape and pass the information to the Rose School of Thought's person in charge in Backland. In secret, the Sanguine's demigod will be watching them. Through the message chain, they will find the person in charge. That person must be a key member of the Rose School of Thought. Once he's killed or even captured, we'll take the next step in our operation based on the information we managed to obtain. That's more reasonable. The main point is to use your own understanding of the Rose School of Thought to create a plan instead of using yourself as bait. That's a way to effectively control the situation and not destroy Backland. Klein nodded gently and said, "If that's the case, I can participate." He didn't say that he needed to think about it or return to confirm the level of danger. This was because this matter wasn't something that needed to be done anytime soon for Sharon and the Sanguine. When he divined problems, he could always call it off as a participant. "What kind of payment do you need?" Marie's standing posture relaxed as he asked. Klein smiled. "If there aren't any accidents the entire time, I wish to receive 1 instance of free assistance from Ma'am Rionette Tinnicker. If I have to involve myself in the operation, I can always add the condition of having priority on the spoils of war. You can discuss this with Ma'am Rionette Tinnicker before writing to tell me the answer." In fact, he was still a little puzzled. He believed that with such a plan, there was no need to seek him out. With Miss Messenger hiding in the shadows, it was enough to prevent any accidents that Sherlock Moriarty could deal with. There's no need. Sharon, with her exquisite looks and pale face, shook her head gently like a doll. "I can agree to it now. Has she already discussed it with Miss Messenger?" Klein thought for a few seconds and honestly asked, "Then why don't you directly ask Miss Rionette Tinnicker for help to prevent any accidents from happening?" Sharon's hair remained motionless as though bound tightly by the petite bonnet. She replied in an ethereal and fleeting voice, "She doesn't wish for the Sanguine to discover her existence." "Is that so?" Klein deliberated for a moment and raised another question. "You advocate temperance, so why are you seeking out the key members of the Rose School of Thought? Is revenge not within the limits of temperance?" Sharon looked at him with her blue eyes and said, "In recent decades, the Rose School of Thought has been trying its best to let the Mother Tree of Desire descend into the real world. This will bring about an unimaginable disaster. In addition, Teacher also desires her body to be complete. If the Mother Tree of Desire were to descend into the real world, it would be an unimaginable disaster for me. However, what has this got to do with the completeness of Miss Messenger's body? Her body was once torn apart and is being held by different key members of the Rose School of Thought. Or can the body's high sequence beyonders of the same sequence and their characteristics be made into a part of her, through some ritual?" Klein mumbled inwardly as he probed, "Is Abomination Sequence one of the mutant pathway? Then what are Sequence 2 and Sequence 3? He had asked Miss Sharon the first question before, but he had only received a vague answer. Sharon answered without any hesitation. She didn't speak too fast, but her voice remained ethereal and inhuman. "I wasn't too sure about it in the past. Now I can confirm that Sequence 1 is Abomination, Sequence 2 is Ancient Bane, Sequence 3 is Cursed Artifact but is now known as Disciple of Silence. Does that mean that you weren't certain when I asked you the last time? That is to say, when you summoned Miss Messenger and reunited with her, you managed to learn more secrets?" Klein nodded in enlightenment. "I have no more questions. After confirming the time for the operation, write to me. Thank you." Sharon once again floated up and bowed. Marie pressed his hand to his chest and slightly bent his back. "There's no need." Klein stood up from the high stool and wore his top hat with a smile. This time, without a smacking sound, scarlet flames rose and engulfed him. Under the night sky, countless lights silently lit up in Backland, as though they were stars that were covered in clouds descending upon the land. With the few stars twinkling, Klein returned to the rental apartment at the periphery of East Borough. After changing his clothes and preparing to return to North Borough's Bockland Street, he heard a series of illusory pleas. It was from a man. After nodding in thought, Klein immediately took 4 steps counterclockwise and arrived above the grey fog. He extended his spirituality towards the constantly expanding and shrinking crimson star. As he expected, this corresponded to the moon Emlyn. The vampire, who was already become a viscount, prayed sincerely, "Honorable Mr. Fool, I wish to apply for a mini-gathering that includes me, Mr. Hanged Man, Ma'am Hermit, Miss Justice, Mr. World." To Emlyn, these people are the Tarot Club's representatives in intelligence, experience, and knowledge. Poor Leonard. Cline chuckled silently as he leaned back into his chair and agreed to Emlyn's request. Above the grayish-white fog, inside the ancient palace, 5 dark red beams of light appeared on both sides of the long bronze table, forming different figures. "Mr. Moon, has the Sanguine's plan been finalized?" Audrey greeted everyone before asking with interest. Emlyn surveyed the area and frankly said, "Yes, the detailed plan is this. Through 2 Temperance faction members who escaped from the Rose School of Thought." He recounted the plan Sharon had described to Sherlock Moriarty from a different angle to the World Gehrman Sparrow and Company. When he was done, he said, "If we can obtain effective information, we Sanguine plan on seizing the opportunity to launch a surprise attack on the Rose School of Thought's headquarters. We hope to take an important item from them." "What important item?" Katlia asked curiously. This was an item that could spur an ancient faction into an attempt on attacking a secret organization's headquarters. It definitely wasn't simple. Its importance might even exceed that of an ordinary angel, stronger than some Grade 0 sealed artifacts. Emlyn didn't hide anything. "It's a holy artifact left behind by our Sanguine ancestor. I'm not sure what particular accident led to the Rose School of Thought obtaining it." "A holy artifact left behind by Lilith. In the hands of the Rose School of Thought. The Sanguine has placed great importance on it." This time, Cline, who was acting as the World Gehrman Sparrow with his true body, had key points flashing through his mind. Then, together with his understanding of many secrets, he quickly had an unconfirmed theory. That might be the key to the Mother Tree of Desire's ability to intrude and control part of the Moon Domain's authority. This is something Miss Sharon and the others didn't mention. The Sanguine have kept things from him as well and have quite great ambitions. Yes, I can't use ambition to describe them. That ancestor Lilith, whose identity is unknown, seems to have foreseen the chaos from the situation and the coming of the apocalypse. Therefore, the Sanguine was made to change its style and become more proactive, so as to have more things to rely on. This is the acquisition of a lifebuoy in preparation for the apocalypse. Cline didn't say a word as he listened silently. The others were also taking in the important information that the moon had revealed, and Alger was no exception. He pondered for a few seconds before saying, "In other words, you Sanguine will be hiding in secret this entire operation and won't be targeted by the Rose School of Thought." "Yes," Emlyn answered rather casually. The Sanguine's plan was jointly decided by Duke Olmer and Marquis Nibs, as well as a few earls in Backland. Many problems had undoubtedly been brainstormed and reconsidered. Regardless, even if a pig were to live for more than a millennium, it would definitely gain a certain level of wisdom and experience. Alger nodded slightly. "I have another question. How are you so sure that the Backland person in charge of the Rose School of Thought is only a saint? There might be more demigods or even an angel hiding. You should know very well that the situation in Backland is very complicated. It's not impossible for the Rose School of Thought to increase the number of powerhouses it has to plot certain matters. If that's the case, you will end up resembling thieves who wish to steal something, only to storm right into Civelhouse Yard." Civelhouse Yard was another name for the Backland Police Department. Emlyn became more relaxed. This time, Duke Olmer will personally watch over the entire process. Even if the Rose School of Thought's angel descends, we can easily escape. In addition, no matter which side, they're not actually willing to create an intense conflict in Backland. Without any crushing advantage or the confidence to not cause a huge commotion, they will naturally cease any fighting. Upon hearing his answer, the comers of Katlia's mouth curled up indecimably as she warned, "To beyonders who aren't demigods, even a slight clash between angels would produce aftershocks that are enough to destroy them." Emlyn snapped out of his state of drowning in pride from experiencing the potency of the Sanguine. He was momentarily at a loss for words. At this moment, Audrey's eyes darted around as though she was thinking of something. "Mr. Moon, what do you need to do in this plan?" "What do I need to do?" "Monitoring the secret members of the Rose School of Thought and locking onto the true target from the information received will be done by Earl Mistral. The one who will ultimately take action is Marquis Nibs, Earl Mistral, and the Rose School of Thought Temperance faction's demigod. Duke Olmer will be the one monitoring in secret to prevent any accidents. My only job is apparently to contact that wraith named Marie and maintain communications between both parties. The more Emlyn thought about it, the odder his expression became. It seemed like there was nothing for him to do, or at least, nothing particularly important. Emlyn blinked as he leaned back in his chair. He spoke unhurriedly and with a hint of a smile. He answered Miss Justice's question. What I need to do is very simple. My role is to ensure that both parties can complete the collaboration successfully. That means you don't need to participate in the battle, right? Audrey had originally wanted to press with such questions, but after sizing up the moon, she reflected on the words said and said with a faint smile, since that's the case, there's only one thing you need to do to ensure your own safety. Makes sense. I can't affect myself because of this matter. Anyway, there's nothing that needs my assistance. I'm not in charge of the risky parts of the operation. I'll later rent Leymano's travels and spend money to get the world to record a few pages of teleport. My safety will basically be guaranteed. Emlyn thought for a few seconds and said with a nod, excellent suggestion. As there were no other members of the Tarot Club participating in the Sanguine's hunting operation and wasn't under their control, the private min gathering quickly ended and the participants returned to the real world. Klein wasn't in a rush to leave. After his figure disappeared, he appeared in the Fool's Chair again and beckoned for the unshadowed crucifix and the Marauder Pathway mystical item, Broken Finger. At that moment, the surface of the two grayish-white tweezers that resembled the polishing of finger bones had produced a piece of gravel that sucked all the light around it, making it look pitch black. It slowly swirled and gathered as though it was trying to form a new shape. As for Broken Finger, the grayish-white color had turned transparent as it reflected some light, producing tiny holes. The unshadowed crucifix can actually slowly purge the Beyonder characteristics from mystical items and sealed artifacts and let them combine together. Of course, the premise is that there's a power similar to the mysterious space above the gray fog to suppress it, allowing it to willingly make contact with items with Beyonder characteristics. Klein nodded in satisfaction. At this moment, the grayish-white Broken Finger suddenly began to belt out in a fervent voice, "Oh, my son. Praise you. Praise the sun." As the tweezer-like object sang, a cracking sound emitted from it as though it would shatter into pieces at any moment. But this did not affect its praise of the sun. Klein gaped at the scene, momentarily at a loss for what expression to show. After a few seconds, he sighed. He separated the unshadowed crucifix and Broken Finger and threw them to the corner of the junk pile in different spots. He then suppressed the former using the powers of the gray fog. Then, he prepared to leave and return to the real world. At this moment, the point of light, which represented the Fool's only believer, emitted ripples of light as the sounds of stacked prayers were heard. Klein reined in his thoughts and extended his spirituality over. Immediately, the scene of Danitz praying in his room surfaced before his eyes as a corresponding voice echoed in his ears. Honorable Mr. Fool, your faithful servant wishes you to pass the following words to Gehrman Sparrow. According to my captain, there are many items at sea that's rumored to belong to Vice Admiral Aylmont, but without any exception, they're all fake. And ever since she was injured after that assault, this pirate admiral has placed great care in the secrecy of her course and seldom plunders. The last time her ship appeared was 2 months ago at Theros Island west of the Berserk Sea. Later, it cruised into the massive ocean, her whereabouts unknown. The foreign object in Anderson's stomach is now controlled to some degree and is separated from his body to a certain extent. It won't be able to penetrate his flesh for a very long period of time. There are 2 ways to completely resolve this latent problem. One is to seek the help of the Sun Pathways Sequence 4 Unshadowed. However, this has quite a high possibility of cleansing most of his Beyonder characteristics. The second is to find the Hunter Pathways Sequence 4 Iron-Blooded Night Potion formula. Through the help of the ritual and ingredients, he can directly absorb the foreign object. Anderson is inclined toward the latter choice. He's happy to take the risk. It's obvious that Danitz is forwarding me Vice Admiral Iceberg's answer by imitating her style. This isn't his usual style of speech. However, some of his terms aren't precise enough. Could it be that Danitz had secretly modified it to use terms he understands better? Is he worried that Gehrman Sparrow wouldn't be able to understand? Klein pricked up his brows and cast his attention back onto the content itself. Vice Admiral Aylmont adhered to the advice from the Demoness sect and has hidden in this relatively critical period. If that's the case, it's basically impossible to capture her in a short span of time. In 1 or 2 months' time, perhaps the matter will completely blow up and I wouldn't have a need to seek her out. I'll first send Danitz to look for her and keep some hope. My focus will be on finding Demoness Tracy. I have a way to contact her and can consider using the excuse of working together to deal with Saintess of White Katerina to make her meet with Gairman Sparrow. I'll see if I can control her and use her to fish out Katerina. The elimination of Anderson's latent problem has two solutions, both of which I can help with. Since he's inclined toward taking risks by advancing to absorb the foreign object, I don't have to worry about using Danitz to promote the option of leasing the unshadowed crucifix to him. That's good. At least I don't have to worry about the crucifix given by Adam creating some nasty chemical reaction with the foreign object Adam left in him. As for the potion formula for Iron-Blooded Knight, with how Anderson had played an important role in luring in Sangwil, it's not like I can't give it to him. The foreign object in his stomach is Adam's payment. I can't directly bestow it to him since he isn't a believer of the full. Gairman Sparrow has no reason to give him something at such a high level. Amidst his thoughts, Klein quickly made a decision. He conjured the world Gairman Sparrow and made him take on a prayer stance. In the fog sea, on the Golden Dream. Bang! The wooden door was pushed open and slammed heavily into the wall. Amidst this loud commotion, Anderson, who had been flipping the pages of a book, looked at Danitz, who was standing by the door, with his usual expression. There's a very good mission for you. With a cloak draped over his shoulders, Danitz raised his chin and chuckled. Anderson sized up the pirate opposite him and tsked. You seem to be very smug. What's the mission? Danitz glanced at Anderson and said, accompany me to Theros Island and help me seek out Vice Admiral Ailment's whereabouts. In addition, help me gather the Beyonder ingredients needed for Conspira. Hey, you'll have to pay for it. Anderson nodded in thought. Then, what is the reward? The corners of Danitz's mouth widened as he said in a condescending manner, the Iron-Blooded Knight supplementary ingredient list and the advancement ritual. Anderson didn't respond. He didn't say a word as he focused his gaze on Danitz for nearly 10 seconds. Then, as though he was burning with impatience, he threw away the book in his hand and stood up. He said with a bright smile, when do we set off? Backland, Eastborough, in a rental apartment that had its curtains drawn. Trissy, who was dressed in a black dress, packed her luggage, preparing to head to her next hideout. Her slightly round face was a little slimmer than before. Apart from her sweet smile, she had an indescribable, elegant, and beautiful look. Even though she was in the dirty and chaotic Eastborough, she seemed to be untainted by any dirt. Trissy didn't immediately pick up her black suitcase. After looking around, she walked to the desk and unfolded a piece of paper. She picked up a pen and wrote, Mr. Gairman Sparrow, I've obtained the information I need from that captain of the Royal Guards. He is truly loyal to King George III. You should understand what this means. Next, my goal is to figure out what this king wants. For that, I plan to oppose the demoness sex Saintess of White Katerina. She definitely knows the corresponding secrets. She's a Sequence 3, a demoness of Unaging. She's very difficult to kill, and it's very difficult to capture her. I have to admit that just my strength alone isn't enough to deal with her. If you're interested and confident, we can try cooperating. You know how to contact me. Trissy. Putting down the pen, Trissy folded the letter and began setting up the ritual to summon Gairman Sparrow's messenger. She had only written to the crazy adventurer now because she was worried that he would lock onto her hiding spot with the help of his messenger, and then teleport over, bringing help to launch an assault. Therefore, she waited until she was about to move before making the attempt. Although Trissy wasn't sure what Gairman Sparrow's motives were and couldn't determine if he would launch a surprise attack on her, out of habit, she chose the most reliable method for her, just to be safe. After handing the letter to the messenger, I'll leave and wait for Gairman Sparrow to contact me. I'll try not to meet him until we begin taking action. I wonder what faction is hiding behind him. I have to focus on mobilizing and using him, and not to trust him too much. This is indeed troublesome, but it's sufficiently safe. As Trissy thought, she ended what she was busy with and took 2 steps back. Looking at the candlelight, she chanted in ancient Hermes, I summon in my name, the spirit that wanders about the unfounded, the friendly creature that can be subordinated, the messenger that belongs to Gairman Sparrow. Just as she finished speaking, the candlelight burgeoned and turned abnormally pale. Following that, a figure stepped out of the candlelight and wore a dark and complicated robe, holding 4 blonde, red-eyed heads. The 4 heads had 8 bloodshot eyes that darted around simultaneously as they cast their gaze at Trissy. Trissy's pupils dilated as though she saw something extremely terrifying. Backland, St. George Borough, in a factory room filled with junk. Light flashed in a mirror filled with obvious cracks. Its surface turned dark and deep, as though it was connected to another world. Suddenly, a white hand reached out from under the mirror, as though it had penetrated through layers of aqueous waves. A figure walked out from the shadows. She was none other than the sweet and beautiful demoness Tracy in a long black dress. There was a rare paleness to her face, as though her face had lost all its ruddiness. Her forehead was covered in dense beads of sweat. With a smacking sound, the suitcase in Tracy's hand fell to the ground. She could hardly suppress the horror in her eyes. She then muttered to herself blankly, "His messenger is actually an angel." At that moment, Tracy felt a chill run down her spine, as though a cold wind had blown at her. She had never expected how dangerous it would be to summon a messenger previously. Thankfully, the woman holding the 4 heads in her hands watched her silently for a while before she left without doing anything. 160 Bockland Street, inside Dwayne Dantes' mansion. "Who's it from?" Klein asked with anticipation as he received the letter from Miss Messenger. The 4 heads in Rionette Tinniker's hand spoke one after another, "Vessel of dirtiness, darkness." This nickname. Klein was taken aback when he heard that. For a moment, he didn't immediately figure out who Miss Messenger was referring to. In his mind, the people who knew how to summon his messenger quickly flashed past, one by one, as he filtered through them. In a few seconds, he had the corresponding guess. Tracy. From what Klein knew, this demoness, who had been renamed to Tracy Cheek, might very well be one of the mediums for the primordial demoness's awakening or descent upon the world. In such a situation, calling her a vessel wasn't wrong. And people who knew enough about the mysterious world knew that the primordial demoness was an evil goddess, one that was known as the ultimate bringer of the apocalypse that would end everything. She had the creation of the apocalypse and the destruction of everything as her mission. She also wielded authorities such as desires related to feelings and emotions. It wasn't very apt to describe her with dirtiness and darkness, but it was understandable. Similarly, dirtiness and darkness could also describe Tracy, who had been corrupted by the evil goddess to a certain extent. As expected of an angel, she actually dared to say that about the primordial demoness. Klein secretly marveled as he opened the letter and quickly read it. At that moment, he suddenly recalled something. He hurriedly looked at Miss Messenger and said, "What reaction did the sender have when she saw you?" "She was very scared." Rionette Tinniker's 3 heads spoke one after another without giving the last one a chance to speak, as its head was simply left agape. Klein's expression turned slightly heavy as he deliberated and asked, "Did you mark her?" The head of Rionette Tinniker, which failed to speak previously, rushed to speak. "No," the remaining 3 blonde, red-eyed heads added, "because she had the aura of primordial." Klein fell silent for a few seconds before nodding. "I understand." After watching Miss Messenger step into the void and leave, he unfurled the piece of paper and quickly read Tracy's letter. "She actually sought me out to deal with Saintess of White Katerina. Isn't this exactly what I wanted to do?" Klein's eyes shimmered a few times as he immediately rummaged for a black sticky blob. Right on the heels of that, he transformed into Gehrman Sparrow and smeared the blob uniformly onto a tiny mirror in the room. After patiently waiting for nearly 10 minutes, the black sticky blob vanished into thin air, leaving nothing behind. Klein had failed to contact demoness Tracy. As expected, Tracy, who has been corrupted by the primordial demoness to a certain extent, managed to identify Miss Messenger's level and was given a fright. She probably wouldn't communicate with Gehrman Sparrow anytime soon. Sigh, if I had known Miss Messenger is a special angel, I definitely wouldn't have let her appear in front of Tracy, or I would have informed her that if a demoness were to summon her, she can bring both the person and letter over. Klein sighed silently and could only blame it on his luck. At that moment, he suddenly heard a series of illusory pleas. In a dark alley in the Backland Bridge area, Zio hid Wintry Blade and entered the area, looking around warily. "Not bad, you're getting more and more experienced." A deep male voice sounded, and a figure walked out from the darkness around the corner. He stood tall, wearing a golden mask that revealed his eyes, nostrils, mouth, and cheeks. It was none other than the MI9 member who had contacted Zio before. "Why did you contact me so urgently?" Zio asked. The golden masked man didn't make any small talk and directly asked, "You still seem to be monitoring Viscount Stratford's surroundings. Have you discovered anything unusual recently?" Zio thought and said, "Yes." He had intimate contact with a girl of unknown origins. He made her visit him at his residence late at night several times. "I tried to track that woman down, but I failed both times." Also, Viscount Stratford suddenly went out in the middle of the night 2 days ago. I don't know where he went because I didn't manage to follow him. The golden masked man tersely acknowledged this as he went deeper into the details. Zio answered according to the details she had seen back then. She only concealed the fact that she had met Charmaine in the carriage and how she had followed Viscount Stratford all the way outside the warehouse. Not bad. Your persistence was rewarding. The golden masked man nodded slightly. He didn't seem to doubt what Zio had said. He sighed and said, "With this, your contributions to us will increase significantly. To be frank, if this continues, you'll soon be able to accumulate the contributions needed for the Sequence 6 potion. However, before that, there will definitely be a strict examination. And with your background, hey, it will fail the examination without a doubt. After all, I know it very well. Actually, there's no need for you to seek the truth. I know that this was the motivation for you to persist in continuing the mission regarding Viscount Stratford, but my personal suggestion is to put the matter aside. With your current sequence and abilities, it's enough to let your mother and brother lead a very good life. Don't worry, no one will cause you trouble. And if you wish to continue persisting, I cannot guarantee what will happen." Although Zio had already expected such an explanation, she was helpless in resisting her emotions and throbbing heart. She blurted out a question, "Who exactly are you?" "I'm just an ordinary mid-sequence Beyonder," the golden masked man said with a smile. "You might not know that the post of Captain of the Royal Guards has the corresponding authority in MI9. It's equivalent to a deputy director that handles matters related to the royal family. Back when your father was alive, I was his subordinate and had received his help in various aspects. After his passing, I, who didn't commit any wrongs or hide any matters, was removed from the core of MI9. See, hey, I'm only responsible for informants on the outside like you." Upon saying that, the golden masked man sighed. "Your father helped me a lot. So, after I recognized you, I deliberately made you become an informant under me. With the extent of my power, I provided you some help. I have a family of my own and my own life, so I can't take excessive risks or do anything too dangerous for you. Let's do this, I'll help you get the potion formula for Judge. Afterward, stop your contributions and your pursuit to advance your sequence. Do something that will improve your life. As for what you want to do or plan to do in private, I don't know, nor do I want to know." Zio fell into a daze. Her lips trembled as she said, "What kind of person was my father?" The golden masked man sighed as he replied, "He was a really brave, noble, and just aristocrat, but he wasn't that perfect. He was impulsive, eager, prone to anger." Zio silently listened and had planned on asking further, but all she said was a phrase, "Thank you. Go back. After obtaining the Judge formula, I'll leave you a message to meet me," the golden masked man said with a wave. After Zio completely disappeared from the alley's entrance, the golden masked man was just about to turn around when a slightly ethereal voice sounded in his ears, "She's lying." She had tailed Viscount Stratford to the scene back then. "It's something that can be confirmed." The golden masked man fell silent for a moment before saying to the shadow beside him, "She might have only been worried that this would arouse suspicion. How can she defeat Viscount Stratford at her sequence? Besides, wasn't it said that Viscount Stratford carried a Grade 1 sealed artifact? I believe that she likely didn't dare approach. Otherwise, she wouldn't even be able to survive." The slightly ethereal voice replied, "No matter what, since there is a doubt, we need to do further investigations. Don't inquire about it in the future." Outside the alley, Zio walked calmly along street lamps. She deliberately didn't mention that she had followed Viscount Stratford. This wasn't to hide the truth, to clear herself of suspicion, or to not invite trouble. In fact, that was contrary to her true motives. Before the Tarot Club, her plan was to say that she had followed Viscount Stratford to a particular warehouse in the dock area. Outside, she was scared off by a terrifying hurricane. This was more convincing and made it less prone to suspicion. However, after knowing that this matter piqued the World Gamin Sparrow's interest, she secretly changed her mind and decided to use her explanation to garner suspicion. She felt that if she wanted to investigate the king's secret at her level, it might take another 3 to 5 years, or even longer. Perhaps, there wouldn't be any hope forever. But with the world's help, success was a possibility. As such, she was willing to bear the risks and place herself right in the middle of the tides. And today, before meeting the golden masked man from MI9, Zio had prayed to Mr. Fool so that he could inform the World Gamin Sparrow of her thoughts. Above the endless grey fog, in the magnificent and ancient palace, With one hand holding the unshadowed crucifix, and the other holding the sea god scepter, he was observing the real world through the crimson star that represented judgment. In his spiritual vision, apart from the short Miss Zio and the golden-masked MI9 officer, there was another person hidden in the dark alley. This was a man in his 30s. He didn't have any special features, and he looked like the typical Loanese man from the Mid-North area. Not only did he blend into the shadows, but he also had the characteristic of automatically making people dismiss his existence. If he weren't above the grey fog and had true vision, Klein suspected that even he wouldn't be able to discover the person if he were there in person. He would only be able to outline the person with his spiritual intuition when the person took any abnormal actions. Hiding in the shadows with psychological invisibility. Half of it depends on an item, while the other half depends on his sequence. In conclusion, this isn't a demigod. That's right. In the eyes of the king's faction, Ms. Zio is only a sequence 7 and doesn't have any notable mystical items. If the matter concerning Viscount Stratford was really related to her, there must be a mastermind behind her, or even a faction. In this situation where there are undercurrents surging about, letting a demigod who might know too much perform the investigation might throw them into a trap. And if a demigod who knows little of the situation were to do it, there might be a chance that the information to be leaked to the three churches and result in an impetus for them to be investigated. In this case, a sequence 5 or sequence 6 beyonder with trustworthy strength while also not knowing too many secrets due to his limitations in rank is an excellent choice. Klein silently said to himself, giving up the thought of teleporting over as Gehrman Sparrow to capture him. He couldn't get any useful information for now. He decided to wait patiently, waiting for the situation to change. Of course, it wasn't possible for him to continue monitoring from above the grey fog. If that happened, his physical body in the real world would be defenseless for prolonged periods of time. An accident would be disastrous. Hence, he created a batch of charms and handed it to Judgment, the magician, and the other Tarot Club members. They were to immediately activate the charms if the situation deteriorated. That way, they could receive the help of the world. This would be simpler than directly reciting the honorific name of the fool to get him to forward the information. This was inspired from the Evermite coat of arms that the ascetic leader of the Church of Evernight, Ariana, had provided him. It was equivalent to a solidified ritual that pointed to him. From a mysticism angle, the principle wasn't complicated. The difficulty needed in carrying out the ritual was that the target could react upon receiving the news from a distance away. This was to mean that for a limited distance, a sequence 3 cent was fine, but for unlimited distances, it needed to be at the angel level. As a newly advanced demigod, Gehrman Sparrow was able to allow the charm to be useful because, when he made it, he used the corresponding honorific name and symbol of sea god Carvatur, and with the help of the grey fog, he could respond throughout the world. It sounded a little complicated, but simply put, he had made use of his other identity's level. As for the materials used for the charms, they were mostly tin, extremely easy to obtain and cheap. In the Backland Bridge area, Zio had both hands in her brown jacket pockets as she strolled leisurely along the streets. Under the light of a street lamp that was quite a distance away, her expression was relatively calm, but she was unusually tense. The hands in her pocket either held the handle of the wintry blade through a hole while the other was holding onto a charm made of tin with some force. That was the summoning charm, provided by the world Gehrman Sparrow. As she walked, she made several detours without suffering from any ambush. The night remained quiet and tranquil. Initially, she was worried that the king's faction would be able to openly capture her through MI9 or other official organizations and bring her back for an investigation. In this case, summoning Mr. World would only lead him into an extremely awkward and dangerous situation. It was equivalent to being at odds with all the official factions in Backland. But later, she realized that such a development wouldn't occur. This was because her existence would be exposed to the three churches. When that happens, the ones doing the investigation definitely wouldn't be the king's faction inside MI9. The investigation must be done in secret. The person that appears might not even be someone from the military. Well, they're still watching, afraid that I'm only bait. Mr. World said not to trouble him if we can resolve it ourselves. Zio looked around her without letting down her guard. She didn't continue loitering outside and returned to the periphery of East Borough and entered her rented condominium. Frankly speaking, she didn't want to involve Fours in this risky endeavor. However, the two of them were the ones who had been following Viscount Stratford. This meant that Fours had also been put on the investigation list. Although, as long as Fawes hid in East Borough and seldom went out, it wasn't certain that MI9 could find her. Doing so would lead to the corresponding investigations to reach out further. Based on her past experience, family and friends, as well as people communicated by letters would definitely be investigated. This easily affected others. Furthermore, if the two of them hid separately and didn't stay together, the feeling of them being bait became too obvious. It made it difficult for them to hook up any targets. After getting Fawes' approval, Zio finally chose to face the subsequent development with her friend. Opening the door and entering the house, Zio had just taken off her cap when she saw Fawes put down the magazine. She stood up, curled her hair, smiled, and asked, "You weren't followed, right?" This was a secret signal that the two of them had agreed upon ahead of time. On the surface, it showed their concern about being followed, but they were actually asking if they had been investigated. No. Zio shook her head seriously. Fawes didn't continue this topic. Instead, she went on, grumbling about how she couldn't buy any good tea leaves or alcoholic beverages in the vicinity. It required her to walk very far to find them. This warm and peaceful atmosphere continued till late at night. The two of them entered the bedroom and slept in a bunk bed. After the candles were extinguished, Zio was about to say something when a holy light suddenly appeared in front of her. The light instantly condensed into a silhouette, and 12 pairs of wings formed from scarlet flames appeared on its back. The figure descended and the layers of wings closed, enveloping Zio. Mr. Fool's angelic blessing. Zio was instantly enlightened. This was also a matter that she had solemnly asked Mr. Fool when she made the prayer to contact the world Gehrman Sparrow, as she already knew that, apart from the Demoness sect, the Psychology Alchemists was also working with the King's faction. And not only were Beyonders of the Spectator pathway capable of hypnosis, but they could also dreamwalk. They needed to be careful of any investigations that used these two powers. If she didn't prepare herself, she suspected that she wouldn't even detect an investigation that had been carried out, let alone be able to inform Mr. World. Everything quickly calmed down. Zio opened her mouth and said to Fawes, who was sleeping in the bunk beneath her, "Good night." "Good night." Fawes didn't react in time, as though she was almost falling asleep. This made Zio realize that she had also received the angelic blessings. Time ticked by and the two fell asleep. After an unknown period of time, the dazed Zio suddenly snapped awake, aware that she was dreaming. Right on the heels of that, she felt something shadowy floating in the dark sky, and all kinds of thoughts from deep within her heart surged out to form a dream. These thoughts were mainly things that she had been most keenly aware of recently, including the night she barged into the warehouse and attacked Viscount Stratford. At first, Zio was a little frightened. She wanted to wake up from her dream, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't extricate herself from that state. It was as though she was still in a dream even when she opened her eyes. She quickly calmed down and tried to control those thoughts, only to realize that it wasn't difficult. Thus, the memories of the attacks on Viscount Stratford were buried. However, after some consideration, Zio deliberately didn't do it well, leaving some clues behind. In the dreamland, she and Fawes discovered that something weird had happened inside the warehouse, but it wasn't the same account she gave to MI9 that the tornado tore through the roof. Furthermore, they didn't escape immediately. Zio believed that this would allow the person who invaded her dreams to notice a problem but be unable to resolve it. After this, the investigators would confirm that there was a demigod or some faction behind the two of them. They would then believe that they weren't too difficult to deal with because the level of the secret wasn't too high. This way, it was likely that they would send a demigod to deal with the aftermath. And this was a development that Zio anticipated. After all, every demigod had a high probability of knowing the king's secrets due to the positions they occupied. At this moment, Zio's dream began to turn scattered, as though she had escaped some sort of guidance. She knew that this was a sign of the intruder leaving. For the rest of the night, nothing abnormal happened to her and Fawes. The sky lit up and the morning sun's rays started to emanate through the thin fog. After breakfast, Audrey brought along her big golden retriever, Susie, her personal servant, Annie, and her bodyguard. They boarded their carriage as usual and headed for the Loan Charity Bursary Foundation at 22 Phelps Street. The chiming of bells rang out from the outside occasionally, bringing with them some sort of special energy. It made Audrey turn to look at the street and take in the sights of people coming and going. This calmed her down and made her feel more energized. She only felt that the whole world was filled with vibrancy. Just then, from the corner of her eye, Audrey saw a figure in the carriage. The figure was wearing a black three-piece suit, a dark red bow tie, and held a top hat in his hand. His hair was completely white, but it was still thick. His light blue eyes seemed to contain infinite wisdom. This was Vin Rambus, the psychology alchemist's counselor, a demigod from the spectator pathway. Suddenly, Audrey fell into a daze, as though she had lost all her vigilance and wariness. In the carriage, Susie, Annie, and the others wore vacant looks as though they had entered a state of blankness. Vin Rambus's gentle voice rang out, two things. Firstly, don't you know Fours and Zio? Arrange to meet them and hypnotize them. That gentle voice seemed to resonate with the thoughts deep in Audrey's heart. She only felt a little resistant to it before feeling as though it came from her heart, and that it was her truest thoughts. Vin Rambus looked at her emerald green eyes and said unhurriedly, secondly, in the upcoming banquets and balls, don't be as opposed as before to the few princes who take the initiative to show their fondness. Also, praise them a few times in front of Earl Hall and his wife. Remember all of the above, this is the reflection of your subconscious. Then, forget that I once said these things to you. Forget that this behavior is different from your usual behavior. Don't try to seek blessings, and stay away from key spots in the Church of Evernights Mass. With that said, Vin Rambus retracted his gaze from Audrey's eyes. He turned to cue Annie and the rest, preventing them from being surprised by their mistress's subsequent odd behavior. After dealing with all these things, he disappeared from the carriage without causing a stir. Ring. Another bike passed by the window as Audrey's slightly anxious eyes recovered their luster. She looked at the people on the street coming and going when she suddenly let out a soft exclamation. Then, embarrassed, she turned her head to say to Annie and the rest, I forgot something. I have to visit Glaint first. At this moment, the carriage hadn't left Empress Borough and wasn't too far from Viscount Glaint's residence. The servants like Annie didn't find it strange or become put in a difficult position. They quickly instructed the coachman to turn into another street. This continued until 20 minutes to 10 in the morning. Audrey finally arrived at Phelps Street. She walked into the second floor of the Lowen Charity Bursary Foundation and entered her director's office. Looking at Annie and the others either organizing documents or using the spring water they brought alone to prepare black tea, Audrey brought Susie along to the lounge that was attached to her office. It was as though she wanted to check on her face to determine if she needed her lady's maid to help touch up her makeup. During this process, Audrey glanced at the keyhole and asked Susie in a relaxed manner, was there anything abnormal with my behavior today? This was a habit that she had only gotten in the past few days. It had only started from the moment Vin Rambus disappeared. She knew that Mr. Fool's angelic blessing wasn't permanent. It could only be sustained for some time, and she wasn't able to determine when Vin Rambus would visit her. When that happens, she wouldn't have the time to pray to Mr. Fool and do the corresponding preparations. Therefore, from her understanding and cautious attitude towards psychology and mysticism, she not only checked her behavior 3 times a day for any abnormalities or for any excessive coincidences, but she also instructed Susie to take note of her condition and be her mirror. This was a precautionary measure of being hypnotized by Vin Rambus and cued without realizing it. Susie sat by the side and thought seriously before saying, yes. Quote ellipsis quote. Audrey's smiling expression stiffened. She quickly looked at Susie and waited for her explanation. Susie wriggled her nose and looked around before continuing, you didn't plan on paying a visit to Viscount Glaint when you left the house, but you changed your schedule halfway. You'll inform me of the general schedule ahead of time over the past few days. Also, you said that you would discuss it with me if you decide to suddenly change or add to the schedule. Upon hearing Susie's reply, Audrey's expression turned grave. She still didn't feel that there was anything unusual about this matter, but this situation was extremely abnormal. This made her almost certain. Vin Rambus had been here before, right after she left her house and before she headed for Glaint's residence. The other party had already cued and hypnotized her and removed all traces. However, he didn't exhort a dog, making it feel like everything that it saw was normal. Audrey subconsciously wanted Susie to leave so that she could pray to Mr. Fool, but she was hesitant. Would my current behavior be monitored by Vin Rambus? Will he be sitting somewhere in this room and quietly be watching me? No, if that were to happen, he would have discovered a problem when I asked Susie. Praying wouldn't make the outcome any worse. Even if he's here, Mr. Fool would also discover it. I can promise a future sacrifice and pray that he directly send divine punishment. However, why don't I wish to pray and ask for help? Audrey stood there, all kinds of feelings running through her as she instinctively wanted to escape. This made her realize the contradiction, and she realized that there was a bit of resistance in her heart. From the perspective of psychology and mysticism, she had a vague guess. She quickly put aside the idea of seeking help, allowing herself to be in her usual state of praying to the goddess without the desire of getting a response. This greatly reduced the conflict in her heart. Audrey instantly became confident. She gestured for Susie to leave first, then she looked into the mirror and began softly hypnotizing herself. You're not asking for help. You're only doing your usual prayers. You're not asking for help. You're only doing your usual prayers. After repeating it over and over again, the vortex deep in the light greenness of Audrey's eyes that could suck a person's soul slowly dissipated, and her eyes returned to normal. She then raised both her hands and placed them between her mouth and her nose. Then, she chanted in ancient Hermes, the fool that doesn't belong to this era. I might have met Vin Rambus. As she spoke, she didn't mention any desire for any help but described her discovery. After waiting for a while, a deep red light appeared in front of Audrey, drowning her like a tidal wave. Suddenly, her thoughts became clear, and images flashed across her mind. It was Vin Rambus in his black three-piece suit, who was sitting in a horse carriage, sitting opposite her. It was the elder who had exhorted her with a gentle voice. It was the demigod from the spectator pathway whose light blue eyes that seemed to contain infinite wisdom and vortices. At the same time, those words resounded in Audrey's ears again, making her remember everything that had happened. After the crimson glow disappeared, she saw the long bronze table in front of her. Sitting at the seat of honor at the end of the table was a figure shrouded in the grayish-white fog. As emotions of fear, horror, and panic surged through her, she stood up, lifted her skirt, and curtsied to the great existence. Thank you for your blessings, Honorable Mr. Fool. Klein nodded and smiled approvingly. You handled it well. Upon hearing this, Audrey suddenly felt at ease, no longer as nervous as before. She sat down and calmly described what had happened to her. As the fool, there was no way for him to directly discuss things with Miss Justice, analyze it for her, or give suggestions. All he did was smile and say, "This is a test of fate." A test. Only through this test will I have the qualifications to become a demigod, so that I can protect the people I want to protect in Backland, which is in a state of turmoil. Audrey interpreted Mr. Fool's hint and nodded seriously. I understand. Without another word, Klein sighed and smiled. Go back and welcome it. Audrey was about to express her gratitude again when the crimson light appeared before her eyes, blurring everything she saw. In the blink of an eye, she returned to the real world, but she didn't forget or ignore anything a test. Does that mean that I have to resolve the danger of Vin Rambus without exposing my secrets? Even if I cause the death of Vin Rambus, I still wouldn't be suspected by the psychology alchemists. How should I do that? Audrey looked at the abnormally beautiful blonde in the mirror. She turned her head slightly and glanced slightly to the side. There was a large lounge in that direction. It belonged to the director, who didn't have any responsibilities in the Foundation. Just 10 minutes ago, Audrey had seen Mr. Dwayne Dantes inside when she was heading up the stairs. Above the grey fog, Klein's fingers tapped on the edge of the long mottled table as he analyzed what had happened between Miss Justice and Miss Judgment last night. That's not right. Adam had given me the unshadowed crucifix through Miss Judgment and Miss Magician. How could he not know which existence is behind them? What other test needs to be done? Last night, I thought that the investigation of Miss Zio was purely an action from the King's faction, where they only used the help of a mid-sequence Beyonder from the psychology alchemists. And for some reason, Adam didn't share any information of the Fool with the King's faction or the Demoness sect. After all, he still hopes that I can give him some feedback. But from the looks of it, this probe has Adam involved in it. Otherwise, Vin Rambus wouldn't be involved in this matter. Even for the Twilight Hermit Order, a scent is rather precious and important. They wouldn't give one up so easily as a sacrifice. What is Adam trying to test? He is testing to see if Miss Judgment's investigation of Viscount Stratford and her subsequent actions were purely by her own choice, or if it had the will of the Fool involved. If the Fool gets the unshadowed crucifix and realizes that the King's secret is related to Adam's scheme while still insisting that his subordinates investigate it, that will be making the Twilight Hermit Order an enemy. And Adam knows that Gairman Sparrow is a blessed. But with Adam's abilities, there's no need to test out anything. Just sitting next to Miss Judgment and listening to her true thoughts will be enough to grasp the actual situation. There's no need to go through so much effort. Unless, he has already left Backland, or rather, to avoid certain problems, he doesn't dare enter this big city again, and can only investigate it through his subordinates. My warning to Ms. Ariana and the Church of Evernite has taken effect, causing Adam to sense the danger of a divine descent. Probably. Even though he knows that Gehrman Sparrow has something to do with the death console, he probably wouldn't notice that something has happened to Artificial Death. Even the Numinous Episcopate's Artificial Death faction hasn't noticed a thing, therefore, with the authority of concealment augmenting this, he has no idea that the goddess wouldn't be able to carry out a divine descent for a long period of time. Next up, I'll have to deal with Vin Rambus. I must make sure that Miss Justice is steered clear so as to not have any relations and isn't suspected. Just as this thought crossed his mind, he saw Miss Justice Audrey enter the director's lounge through her prayer light in search of Dwayne Dantes. He quickly reined in his thoughts and returned to the real world. Good morning, where's Mr. Dantes? Audrey smiled politely as she asked the young male valet that was of Loan and East Balham descent. Enony bowed and said, he went to the washroom and will be back soon. Honorable lady, do you wish to wait here? All right. Audrey found a single-seater and sat down with all sorts of thoughts running through her mind. Frankly speaking, if she only had to deal with Vin Rambus, she had already come up with a concrete plan. It was to hypnotize herself in advance. When Vin Rambus came to gather feedback, she would activate the world Gehrman Sparrow's charm without any ill intent. Then, she would work with the crazy adventurer to hunt the demigod. Humph, in order to ensure that there aren't any problems, I can also make a request to Mom Hermit for help. She's already a demigod and can lurk in the darkness. She can then combine forces with Mr. World at the critical moment. That way, Vin Rambus likely wouldn't be able to escape. Audrey pursed her lips as she held back from grinding her teeth. As for how the Hermit was to come to Backland, she didn't find it problematic. She could rent Leymano's Travels and get Mr. World to record teleport before requesting Mr. Fool to pass it to her. But this way, even if Vin Rambus didn't manage to escape, the psychology alchemists would have ample reason to suspect that the murderer was the last person the demigod had interacted with, Audrey herself. And this means that there would be countless troubles in the future. Audrey's eyes shifted slightly as she tried hard to calm herself down. At that moment, the white-sideburned and elegant Dwayne Dantes returned from the washroom. He smiled and greeted the noble lady who was waiting for him. After letting his valet, Enony, guard the door, this tycoon looked around before finally turning his gaze to Audrey. You seem to have encountered some difficulty. Audrey didn't interpret Mr. World's actions and replied frankly, yes. She gave a description of what she had encountered and said, what should I do to solve the problem? What she really meant was how she could avoid leaving behind any remnant problems for the future. Klein smiled and said, why don't you discuss it with the two ladies? That's right. Like Mr. Moon, we can request for a private mini-gathering. Oh, Judgment Zio, the Magician Force will definitely participate. Apart from him, I can also invite Mr. World, Mr. Hanged Man, Mom Hermit, Mr. Moon. I can count him out. Audrey felt excited for some baffling reason. At this moment, she felt as though she wasn't fighting alone. I understand. Audrey nodded with a smile. She then thought of another problem and quickly took the opportunity to ask, Vin Rambus has made me no longer reject the princes and praise them in front of my parents. What's his motive? Klein thought for a moment and said, perhaps it's to show some kind of friendliness on the surface. It's to rope in your father and make a hint to the Church of Evernite behind him. Regardless of the king's secret, whether it succeeds or not, he will definitely need at least one Orthodox church's support so as to reduce the opposing forces. Is that so? Audrey didn't really reject Mr. World's explanation. This was the politics she was familiar with if she stripped off the outer shell that involved beyond her powers. She didn't stay any longer and returned to her own office. After settling her daily affairs, she grasped her afternoon break and prayed to Mr. Fool and applied for a mini-gathering to be convened. Above the endless grayish-white fog, dark red beams rose up around the long bronze table. Audrey looked around, stood up, and curtsied to the other members. Everyone, I have something I wish to hear from you. It sounds urgent. Alger nodded gently and replied. Audrey sat down and said, yes. She then looked at Zio and Fours. I met Vin Rambus this morning. He hypnotized me to do two things for him and to forget his appearance. Fortunately, I was quite careful and cautious. I quickly discovered something odd, and thanks to Mr. Fool's blessings, I remembered everything. One of the things Vin Rambus asked me to do was to arrange for a meeting with Miss Magician and Miss Judgment and take the opportunity to hypnotize them. I'll then obtain intel on the instigator for the actions they had recently taken and also get them to leave Backland as quickly as possible. What? Fours was originally worried about Miss Justice's safety, but she never expected things to make one rotation before coming back at her and Zio. To think they targeted Miss Audrey. It's really hard to guard against them. She's targeted by a demigod. After a moment of shock, Fours felt more astonished and afraid. She couldn't help but look at her friend and saw Zio sitting calmly, but her hands had unconsciously clenched into fists. Katlia didn't understand something as she frowned and asked. The psychology alchemists, or should I say Vin Rambus, discovered that Miss Judgment and Miss Judgment are members of our tarot club. This was a very serious and crucial matter. Audrey shook her head and said, "No, it's only because I know them in the real world." At that moment, she no longer tried to hide her identity from Fours and Zio. In fact, ever since Zio joined the club and obtained the Judgment card, Audrey knew that she would be exposed sooner or later. Through repeated observations, she had confirmed that her two friends had already guessed it, but they tacitly didn't expose her. "You know them?" Katlia asked in surprise as she adjusted her heavy glasses. Audrey nodded. "Yes, they were actually recommended by me. Mr. Hanged Man can testify." "Ah, didn't we chant Mr. Fool's honorific name because we wanted to save ourselves and get pulled in here? How did it become a recommendation process?" Fours looked at Miss Justice blankly before glancing at Zio, her face blank and confused. Zio also had that rare, similar expression because the word, recommended, had exceeded what she knew as well as her speculations. Audrey felt a little embarrassed. She blinked and explained to her two friends, "Because all of you have your own special qualities, and I also hope that the Tarot Club will develop and expand, I recommended the two of you to Mr. Fool. However, this was just a chance for you. If you hadn't passed Mr. Fool's test, he wouldn't have pulled you in." "Test? What kind of test did I undergo?" Fours was still confused. As for Zio, she thought of many things, especially the origins of the paper that had Mr. Fool's honorific name, as well as her frantic search for an exorcism. No wonder I had an inkling that they knew each other. No wonder Miss Judgment only entered the club after so long. This was probably due to the different individual experiences. Each of them has their own specialties. This specialty is the selection criteria. Do I have one? Katlia came to a realization as she came up with a theory. Upon seeing this, Alger, who had some level of judgment regarding this, wasn't at all surprised as he chuckled and said, "We can talk about this in the future. Miss Justice, the problem you would like to ask about is how to deal with Vin Rambus." "Yes." Audrey returned to the topic and asked seriously, "If we not only have to deal with Vin Rambus but all the psychology alchemists from suspecting me, what should I do?" Alger didn't have any experience in dealing with a demigod, so all he could do was rely on his insight that had been built up over the years. He deliberated and said, "Lock onto the whereabouts of Vin Rambus. Only take action after he has interacted with someone else." "How do I lock onto him?" Audrey asked the question herself before giving the answer. "After getting the answer from Miss Judgment and Miss Magician, I'll wait until Vin Rambus leaves after I meet him again. Then, I'll recite Mr. Fool's honorific name and ask him to cast his gaze on the demigod. Theoretically it's possible. My true vision above the grey fog has a radius of nearly 10 kilometers. As long as Vin Rambus doesn't know teleport, I can confirm his location and trajectory for a short period of time. Then, I can return to the real world and directly teleport over. This will require the help of divination. But the problem is that it requires the Fool to personally intervene. As the world Gairman Sparrow, Klein said in a hoarse voice, "Let me remind you of something." Miss Judgment and Miss Magician had mentioned Adam in the real world. The psychology alchemists originated from the ruins of Hermes, who is a member of the Twilight Hermit Order. And Mr. Fool doesn't wish to be at odds with the Twilight Hermit Order because of this matter. Even if we were to do anything, we must try not to let the other party know. This string of words contained a lot of information that made Alger, Katlia, and the rest feel like they were seriously experiencing a literal brainstorm. Zio and Fours were even more shocked. So that organization is called the Twilight Hermit Order. Mr. Fool doesn't want to be its enemy over this matter. Is it because he had just finished collaborating with the Angel of Imagination Adam over the matter of Ince Sangwil? I never expected the psychology alchemists to be related to the Twilight Hermit Order. Wait, Hermes. He's still alive. He's actually a member of the Twilight Hermit Order. The members of this organization are really unimaginably important figures. Alger first glanced at Gehrman Sparrow before failing to resist the urge to look at Katlia. He realized that the latter was equally shocked without hiding it. The Twilight Hermit Order. Is this the ancient secret organization that Emperor Roselle joined? Katlia mumbled to herself as if she was seeking confirmation. Gehrman Sparrow gave the answer, yes. After you return to the real world, it's best if you don't think about matters like this again. You'll easily be detected. If you don't trust yourself, you can get Miss Justice to give you some psychological cues. In the ancient palace above the grey fog, with the world Gehrman Sparrow's words coming to an end, no one spoke for a moment. The entire place was silent. The psychology alchemists are cooperating with the king's faction and are investigating Zio and I. The founding of the psychology alchemists originated from the discovery of a Hermes ruins, and Hermes is a member of the Twilight Hermit Order. Its leader happens to be Angel of Imagination Adam. And Zio and I had mentioned Adam in the real world. We're in the sights of a king of angels. This. In the world of mysticism, just a slight mistake can result in such dangerous circumstances. Force's mind was filled with Gehrman Sparrow's warnings as she was gripped by horror and panic. Although she had experienced many things in the past, she had never had such a clear realization of the thorny path beyond us tread. Any mistakes could lead to a terrible consequence. I have to be more cautious in the future. Of course, the premise is that I can survive under the watch of King of Angels Adam. May Mr. Fool bless me. Force seriously reflected on the matter and silently prayed. Zio also didn't expect her situation to be so perilous. She didn't expect that something like this would involve a King of Angels. She couldn't help but feel horrified and fearful, but she had already decided to sacrifice herself for the truth. She rapidly calmed down, but couldn't help but shoot a glance at the magician, feeling guilty for pulling her good friend into this conundrum. At this point in time, crying and feeling remorse won't solve the problem anymore. All I can do is try my best to keep Foz alive at the critical moment. Fortunately, there's still Mr. Fool's blessings. Zio cast her gaze at Justice Audrey as she thought to herself. Then what should we do next? She had mixed feelings towards Miss Justice's recommendation. On the one hand, she knew that Audrey thought highly of the Tarot Club and had recommended her purely out of good intentions. On the other hand, she felt that she had gained the notice of a secret existence for no good reason. Thankfully, it was Mr. Fool, or she would have died a tragic death long ago. Even her soul wouldn't be able to receive deliverance. Well, I guess it's because I voluntarily chanted Mr. Fool's honorific name that I was dragged into it. There wasn't any coercion. Ultimately, I'm sitting here of my own volition. It has nothing to do with Miss Justice. Also, if it weren't for her recommendation, I might never have such an opportunity to grow stronger to seek out the truth. Zio pursed her lips as she furtively took a deep breath. Justice Audrey knew about the relationship between the Twilight Hermit Order, Hermes, and Adam, so she was the calmest one there. She just never expected that Foz and Zio's casual mention of the Angel of Imagination had garnered his attention. This made her have an unprecedented awareness of the horror behind the words. Any mention of it will be known. After some deliberation, Audrey looked at the world Gehrman Sparrow and tried to interpret his words. Does Mr. Fool mean that he doesn't want to directly make an enemy of the Twilight Hermit Order at the moment? Does that mean that it can be done indirectly? Klein nodded slightly and said, that should be the case. Does it involve interfering with divination, one's attention, and prophecies? Audrey asked. At this mini-gathering, the world Gehrman Sparrow represented the will of the Fool. Klein laughed and hoarsely said, perhaps a little more indirect. He answered vaguely because the Fool hadn't thought of what to do either. Their conversation seemed to inspire Alger. He looked at Justice, the Magician, and Judgment, one after another. Which of you is a believer of the Evernite goddess? He was almost certain that at least one of the three ladies believed in the Evernite goddess. After all, among the people of Loen and the residents of Backland, the standards for women, and those who had been educated, these filtered out most of the believers of other deities. I am, Zio said without hiding anything. Audrey raised her hand slightly. Seeing this, Alger nodded slightly. We can try to mislead someone and make it seem like the Church of Evernite did something against Vin Rambus, not the Tarot Club. As he said this, Alger skillfully changed the pronoun he used to refer to the group. He was only invited to be a consultant, and wouldn't actually be involved in the matter. He should have said, "You should do this and that," but he had chosen to use "we," pushing the blame to the Church of Evernite. This line of thought seems really familiar. Klein in his The World Gairman Sparrow's manifestation suddenly found it amusing. Then how should the misdirection be done? Audrey's eyes shifted slightly as she hurriedly asked. Alger looked around and said, "Vin Rambus only hypnotized you to not seek blessings and sit in key spots at the Church of Evernite's Mass where you can be cleansed to a certain degree. But he didn't ask you to avoid the Church of Evernite's Archbishop. You can use this to create an opportunity. Meet the Archbishop, of course, there's no need to say anything. This way, when Vin Rambus dies or vanishes, the psychology alchemists will most probably suspect that the Church of Evermite had detected something wrong with you and had set up a trap." Without waiting for Miss Justice to respond, he looked at Zio. "After you're hypnotized but before you leave Backland, head to the nearest church of the Evernite goddess and pray seriously. Act like a spy sent by the Church of Evernite to infiltrate the Tarot Club. This will misdirect the psychology alchemists into believing that the matters pertaining to Vin Rambus were done by the Tarot Club, but was in fact a smokescreen. The true mastermind behind all of this is the Church of Evermite, acting like a spy in the Tarot Club that was sent by the Church of Evernite." Well, Klein felt a little guilty. He was a genuine blessed of Evernite. And Leonard was a genuine Red Glove. It should be said that the Tarot Club's convener and host, Mr. Fool, also draws the crimson moon on his chest. Klein muttered in amusement and helplessness. As a result, he was also rather inspired. This can only fool typical Beyonders. Without the blessings of Mr. Fool's angel, the higher-ups of the psychology alchemists can easily figure out the truth, Katlia reminded. The Hanged Man replied, "So, the main point is that we should be indirectly blessed by Mr. Fool? Otherwise, would it be impossible for us to deceive the Spectator Pathways King of Angels, Adam? Also, Miss Magician and Miss Judgment, when you pray at the Cathedral of the Evernite Goddess, it's best if you pray to Mr. Fool and get his help in extricating yourself from the hypnosis and not immediately leave Backland. Under such circumstances, Backland is safer than anywhere else." "All right," Zio replied seriously. Seeing that the discussion had reached this point, Audrey and the others all looked towards the World Gairman Sparrow, awaiting his response. Klein's thoughts had already taken shape. He deliberated for a moment, then laughed hoarsely. "Actually, there are simpler ways to interfere." "What methods are there?" Audrey's eyes widened as she asked with concern. Klein looked at Miss Justice and pointed at the top of his head. "Once Vin Rambus leaves, bum that hat accessory and trigger the charm I gave you. That feather hat accessory. The hat accessory that can get a so-called response from death. Mr. World hopes to get this existence to disrupt the divination, attention, and prophecy." Audrey's green eyes sparkled as she nodded in thought. "I know what to do. When that happens, the response would be the power of concealment. This way, no matter what happens, Adam can only assume that the goddess had interfered, believing that she had blessed the Hall family and has nothing to do with the Tarot Club. I wonder if the goddess will send Mom Ariana. That way, finishing off Vin Rambus will be made very simple. If not, I'll give myself Angel's Embrace ahead of time and use my marionettes which are dead. That will result in a high chance of victory." Klein mumbled inwardly without saying anything else. Justice Audrey quickly completed her plan, doing so as though she was talking to herself as she spoke to Zio and Fours. "Visit me on Wednesday afternoon. This way, I'll have a chance to see the Church of Evernite's Archbishop in advance. I'll pray to Mr. Fool for him to provide his angelic blessings. That way, I won't be hypnotized by Vin Rambus when I meet him. We'll act once he leaves. Vin Rambus is a cautious and conservative person. He should continue choosing to meet me on the way to prevent himself from being caught or from falling into a trap." Soon, amidst the discussions of the other members of the Tarot Club, the plan was complete. The World Gairman Sparrow declined Katlia's suggestion of providing help. After all, he couldn't guarantee that powerhouses from the Church of Evernite would be involved. As for the payment, all the spoils would belong to the world, and Audrey would provide him with a free help commission according to his request. On Wednesday afternoon, in Viscount Glaint's residence. After returning to the Turf Club, Audrey, who was wearing a simple white dress shirt and a pair of pants of the same, bright leather boots, and a black leather jacket that clung to her waist, stood inside the Viscount's study and looked at Zio and Fours. "Who got you to investigate Viscount Stratford and pursue the king's secret?" Her green eyes were like an ancient pool of water in a deep mountain. It was quiet, deep and clear, making one unknowingly sink into it. At this moment, Zio and Fours were really hypnotized. The former answered in a daze, "It was me. I'm investigating the cause of my father's death. However, I do pray to a particular existence to bless me." Audrey asked a few more questions and received a satisfactory answer. Then, she said with a gentle voice, "Leave Backland and leave this place. You don't belong here. Alright, you'll wake up when you hear me clap." The moment she said that, Audrey clapped her hands and saw Zio and Force's eyes regain their clarity. After exchanging a few more pleasantries, Zio and Force bade her farewell and left. Audrey began to wait patiently. She planned to stay inside Viscount Blaine's residence for another half an hour. She was waiting for Zio to enter the nearest Evernite Goddess Cathedral and finish her prayers before heading elsewhere. This way, regardless of whether Vin Rambus appeared en route or elsewhere, she would be prepared. Picking up the lady's bonnet with a white feather accessory, Audrey walked out of the study, planning to meet up with Susie and Annie first before chatting with Blaine to kill time. She had just taken 2 steps when she heard a gentle and smiling voice, "Well done." Audrey's pupils dilated as she hurriedly turned her head, only to see a silver-haired man standing next to an elegant wall lamp rack. His eyes were light blue, and his clothes were neat. He was none other than Vin Rambus. This demigod was actually waiting in Viscount Blaine's residence for Audrey to complete the hypnosis and receive the answer. At this moment, Zio and Force probably hadn't walked out the main door. This was completely outside Audrey's expectations and the Hanged Man's analysis. This meant that Vin Rambus was present, so there was no need to question the target through Audrey. Being in the vicinity and personally hypnotizing them was just as dangerous. How did this happen? Even if Zio and Force didn't meet with any delays en route and maintain a relatively fast speed, it would take at least 15 minutes to arrive at the nearest Evernite Cathedral. Luckily, I was cautious enough and had prayed to Mr. Fool for an angelic blessing ahead of time. I also actually hypnotized Zio and Force. An upheaval of thoughts instantly ran through her mind before she rapidly suppressed them. At first, she looked confused, and then her face wore a look of realization. It was as if she had finally woken up from her long dream and remembered the things that had been neglected. "Mr. Rambus, why are you here?" Audrey made her voice sound ethereal, as though she was still in a dreamy stupor. As she spoke, she made use of the control of her emotions as a psychiatrist to make an unavoidable hint of anxiety flash through her mind, doing so without causing any abnormalities. This unexpected turn of events made her unsure of how to proceed. Without a doubt, she understood that she had to first deal with Vin Rambus's subsequent questions so that the demigod wouldn't suspect anything. However, if that was the case, he would leave in 3 to 5 minutes after he was done asking. As for Zio and Force, they definitely wouldn't have entered an Evernite Cathedral yet. This inhibited the step needed for the misdirection, and when the time came, igniting the hat accessory and summoning the world easily exposed flaws in the handling of matters in the end. They wouldn't be able to completely fix the inherent problems. No, I'd rather miss this opportunity than proceed with the plan without being fully prepared. Patience, tolerance, and caution are key in the mysterious world. At the very least, Vin Rambus will be making use of me for a long period of time and not directly harm me. He wishes that I marry with some prince, and this process will take more than half a year. I still have plenty of time. I can wait for the second, third, or even fourth or fifth opportunity. The only problem is that I need to inform Zio and Force and get them to really hide as quickly as possible. Audrey quickly came up with a decision as her eyes restored to normal while showing hints of wariness and fear. After observing her reaction and hearing her question, Vin Rambus smiled and said, "This should be your first time hypnotizing someone, and I was worried that an accident would happen, so I specially came here to wait. Hey, given your background, you don't usually have the chance to do this." His voice was gentle and laced with concern. It made the wariness and fear in Audrey's eyes subside bit by bit. But in Audrey's mind world, she once again felt her consciousness being split apart. Some of them were raised, looking down at the island and the sea. This made her clearly realize that her fond feelings and sense of security that she had just felt were all artificial. Seeing that Audrey had returned to normal, Vin Rambus nodded and said, "How did they answer your question just now?" Audrey honestly said, "Zio said that the investigation of Viscount Stratford and the pursuit of the king's secret was all of her own will. She was very suspicious about the death of her father. Her father was the former captain of the Royal Guards, Earl Mason Durr. However, she mentioned that her actions were blessed by a certain existence." As she answered, Audrey almost stopped talking. This was because her spirituality high in the sky was looking down at herself, one on the island of consciousness and the spiritual sea. She saw a figure rising up from the bottom of the sea as it followed up steps that appeared, passing through the subconscious realm and landing on her body of heart and mind's island. The figure was wearing a black three-piece suit, with a head full of silver hair. It was another Vin Rambus. There wasn't a hint of a smile on Vin Rambus's face. He had an extremely sinister air, and a part of his skin was covered in grayish-white scales. Not only did his eyes turn from pale blue to golden, they also turned vertical, looky carrot like a particular animal. If it weren't for the fact that she had experienced something like this before, just the intense level of nervousness she currently felt might have prevented Audrey from acting as though she hadn't noticed anything, while ensuring that she didn't stop speaking or end up stammering. In the real world, Vin Rambus smiled as he looked at Audrey's pretty face and asked further, which existence's blessings? Audrey shook her head as the island of consciousness began to change. When this matter was raised, Zio and Fours became very resistant. There were signs of escaping the hypnosis, so I didn't dare continue asking. Of course, the blessings of a particular existence could be explained as Mr. Fool's attention, and it could also be understood as the goddesses. The lucid Audrey muttered silently under the spiritual sky. Vin Rambus continued to circle around the questions and asked about the details of the hypnosis. After 2 or 3 minutes, he nodded satisfactorily and said, "Not bad. You do have a gift in hypnotizing people. When the recent events come to a close, I will give you the Dreamwalker potion and personally host the ritual for you. Oh yes, don't reject love and marriage too much. You're not even 20 years old, and it's the perfect time to pursue such matters. Your charm is enough to gain everyone's affection and enjoy their attention." Vin Rambus used an indirect hint and guidance to lower Audrey's resistance towards love and marriage. This detestable guy. Audrey puffed up her cheeks under her spiritual sky and muttered resentfully. She then controlled herself to reveal some shyness and longing. Vin Rambus didn't expect to succeed by simply following a logical process. Seeing this, he retracted his invading consciousness and allowed himself to leave the island. He turned around and said, "Forget what I just said. They're all spontaneous thoughts from your heart. After I leave this place and disappear from your sight, you'll forget that I was here." Upon hearing this, Audrey under the spiritual sky couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. This meant that Vin Rambus was about to leave. Even though it had only been 5 minutes since his appearance, making it insufficient for Zio and Fours to enter the nearest Evernite cathedral, Audrey was still eager for Vin Rambus to leave as soon as possible. To face off a demigod of the spectator domain was unimaginably stressful. There's still a chance after this. As long as I maintain my consciousness, there will still be a chance. Audrey, don't be depressed, don't be impatient. Audrey silently consoled herself as she watched Vin Rambus turn around and walk towards the hall. She didn't relax and didn't breathe. She tried her best to maintain her normal state. Suddenly, Vin Rambus stopped in his tracks and turned around. He narrowed his pale blue eyes and looked at Audrey. "Why were you so scared when you first saw me?" "I was too surprised at that time, so I didn't manage to hide some of my emotions well." Audrey felt her scalp tingle under her long, blonde hair as her thoughts whirled quickly. She asked, puzzled, "Really? Isn't this normal? Someone suddenly appeared beside me. A brief shock is inevitable." Vin Rambus nodded, as if agreeing with this explanation. He sized up Audrey and suddenly said, "You used to carry a mystical item that can change one's form with you as an accessory. Why didn't you wear it today?" To a spectator, this detail was an abnormality. "Oh no. I've been hiding lie beneath my clothes most of the time. How did he notice that I wasn't wearing it this time? He has secretly read some of my memories that I didn't protect to appear normal." Faced with Vin Rambus's question, Audrey felt her thoughts stagnant. The reason why she wasn't wearing lie was simple: she was afraid that this accessory would amplify her emotions, preventing her from being able to completely hide her true thoughts when facing a demigod from the spectator pathway. This meant that she had predicted that she would meet Vin Rambus today. This was something that shouldn't have happened under normal circumstances. In the blink of an eye, Audrey grabbed onto an idea and smiled blankly. "It will amplify my emotions and reduce the success rate of the hypnosis attempt. I removed it in advance to avoid any accidents." Vin Rambus nodded and said, "So that's the reason." Just as Audrey was feeling a little relaxed, this spectator pathway's demigod suddenly narrowed his eyes. "If it's just this matter, there's nothing worth suspecting. But compared to when you saw me, the fear that slightly exceeded normal limits seems to imply something." As he said that, Vin Rambus's light blue eyes turned vertical and was quickly dyed with the color of gold. The two golden vertical pupils clearly reflected Audrey's image in her rider's attire. With a buzz, Audrey's thoughts became extremely muddled. Only her, under the spiritual sky barely remained conscious. The surface of the spiritual sea surrounding the island surged with waves, enveloping it. At the same time, the sinister-looking Vin Rambus returned to the island and stopped beneath the sea surface, allowing patches of grayish-white dragon scales to fly into the foundation of the island where most of a human's subconscious lay. Audrey suddenly felt her thoughts twist, prompting her to say everything, confessing all her secrets. Relying on the lucidity of herself under the spiritual sky, she barely controlled herself and didn't reveal anything. She also knew that there would definitely be problems if this continued, so she quickly diverted some of her thoughts and, relying on the angelic blessing and her splintered consciousness, prevent Vin Rambus from noticing it. Some of those thoughts included reaching her hand into her left pocket. Just then, Vin Rambus, who had invaded her mind world, looked increasingly sinister as he snorted. "There really is a problem." If there wasn't a problem, Audrey would have started with the most important matters, revealing all her secrets and private matters one by one, instead of staying silent. Likewise, since the manipulation attempt happened so quickly, Audrey didn't have the time to sort out all her secrets. Even if she wanted to hide anything, her lucidity would be discovered the moment she spoke. After confirming that something was off, Vin Rambus didn't hesitate any longer. His gaze turned extremely cold as grayish-white scales covered his skin. The storm in the spiritual sea suddenly intensified, and Audrey, who was under the spiritual sky, staggered. The last bastion of the defenses of her consciousness was rapidly weakening under the repeated attacks, putting it on the verge of shattering. Humph! Vin Rambus increased the force of the mind storm once again, feeling satisfied that Audrey's entire island was shaking. This meant that he was about to completely control her. At this moment, he heard an ancient word, fate. In the real world, Vin Rambus looked up in surprise. All he saw was that Audrey's green eyes were dyed with the brightest, the most dazzling gold. As the ancient Hermes words resounded, the areas where Audrey and Vin Rambus stood dimmed. It was as if someone had passed by, blocking the window that was closest to them, then quickly left. By the time the light returned, the island filled with a terrifying mind storm in the illusory world had transformed from Audrey's to Vin Rambus's. The person that had intruded on the other party's body of heart and mind went from Vin Rambus to Audrey. Fate Siphon Charm. This was made using a worm of time as the material. Using the Fool's powers, this charm was created. It could siphon off a corresponding target's subsequent fate for a short period of time, exchanging the corresponding fate with the user. It was the consultation fee Audrey had received from Gairman Sparrow after she treated Hazel's mental breakdown. With the corresponding charm, she could divert her future of having her consciousness defenses broken and losing control over her thoughts to Vin Rambus. She then siphoned off the mind storm from him and opened her target's door to the body of heart and mind. She then directly altered and planted the corresponding consciousness's fate. In an instant, the situation reversed. Audrey went from the edge of collapse to gaining the absolute advantage. Of course, this advantage could only last for a short period of time. Frankly speaking, if it weren't for her imagining how she could save herself in a desperate situation, Audrey definitely wouldn't have thought of using the Fate Siphon charm. Or it could be said that, by the time she thought of it, it would be too late. At this moment, just like how she had practiced it countless times in her mind, she suppressed her surprised emotions from the effects of the Fate Siphon charm and quickly confirmed her condition. With her current advantage, she made the hypnosis and mind storm swirl together, instantly opening Vin Rambus's door to his body of heart and mind. Vin Rambus was instantly dumbfounded, as if he was an ordinary person whose attention had been diverted to Audrey's golden eyes and thus fall under her hypnosis. Yes, at this moment, as a demigod of the spectator pathway, he had been controlled by Audrey, who was only a sequence 6. This way, even if the effects of the Fate Siphon charm came to an end, it wouldn't change the development in the real world. However, Audrey knew that, with the help of the magical charm, she was using Vin Rambus's powers to open the door to his body of heart and mind and achieve initial control. Whatever she wanted to do later would definitely be rejected by him, and with her sequence level, she had no means to resist or control such intense power. Furthermore, she could clearly sense that Vin Rambus was subconsciously resisting his current state. In the real world, a small amount of gray scales began to appear on his face. In no time, he would be able to forcefully extricate himself from the state of my initial control over his mind. A realization flashed across Audrey's mind. She then cast her gaze towards Vin Rambus's head, feeling a little regretful that she didn't carry a powerful revolver with her. Otherwise, she could take this opportunity to shoot at him several times in a row in an attempt to kill him. Soon, she recalled that she had dragon scales. She believed that Vin Rambus definitely had it, and that it was even stronger. It wasn't something an ordinary attack could tear through, even most mystical items that were at the mid or low sequences couldn't do so. And if she couldn't kill him in one shot, Vin Rambus would definitely be able to use this opportunity to regain consciousness and escape her control. Without any hesitation, Audrey, who lacked the appropriate offensive abilities, quickly came to a decision: hypnotize him. He's best at hypnotizing and is very resistant against this, so he wouldn't prepare any additional items that can affect his defense. I can't let him do things that will be against his will. With our difference in levels, I definitely can't resist the corresponding subconscious resistance he puts up. Thoughts ran through Audrey's mind as she spread her slightly parched lips. She tried hard not to show any signs of abnormality as she looked into Vin Rambus's eyes and said in a gentle voice, "Find a spot inside Glaint's mansion and wait. Find me in the garden 15 minutes later." Such a subconscious thought didn't stir any obvious signs of being rejected, therefore, Audrey was able to complete her control rather smoothly. To Vin Rambus, he was indeed looking for Audrey today, and the venue for the meeting was also Viscount Glaint's mansion. Audrey's hypnosis was simply changing the corresponding time and place, and the discrepancies were just in a very small aspect. It matched Vin Rambus's thoughts and didn't waste too much of his effort, therefore, she didn't encounter any intense resistance. "All right," Vin Rambus responded to Audrey's words. Audrey didn't care to let out a sigh of relief. She focused and continued looking into the other party's eyes. She gently said, "You will only come looking for me in 15 minutes, so you haven't seen me today. Since you haven't seen me, everything that happened just now definitely didn't happen. They will be forgotten." As Vin Rambus had accepted the hypnosis, he followed the logical train of thought. Although there was resistance, it wasn't anything intense. Soon, the golden light disappeared from those alluring eyes. "Yes, I haven't seen you before. Nothing happened just now," Vin Rambus repeated with a blank expression. The grayish-white scales on the surface of his skin had increased significantly again. After completing this crucial step, Audrey resisted the urge to pat her chest and thought for a second. "When you hear my singing, it will become quiet." She wanted to hypnotize him with her charm, but she realized that she wasn't able to take on a seductive pose, and she couldn't make the corresponding expressions. She could only lift her hand to comb her blonde hair and tilt her head. The ripples in her eyes swirled as her smile beamed. Following that, she hummed a melody, "Manna Under the Moon," in a nasal voice. Vin Rambus looked at the girl in front of him who looked as beautiful as sunlight, flowers, and gems. Listening to the ethereal voice, his mind gradually turned silent, as he no longer had any resistance. Seeing that her initial control was about to be released, Audrey didn't hesitate and pointed to the other side of the corridor. "Go over there, and you will regain consciousness and dispel dragon scales when you see the stained glass." She knew very well that on the other side of the corridor, there were exquisite white stained glass. This order didn't pose any danger, nor did it violate Vin Rambus's will. He immediately took a step forward, walked down the corridor, and turned right. Only when his back disappeared from her sights did Audrey slowly exhale, allowing the fear, alarm, and anxiety to surge into her heart. Her body trembled slightly as she opened her mouth slightly. She couldn't help but gasp and exhale. 10 seconds later, Audrey used placate on herself and calmed herself down. Then, she glanced at the wall clock and stood there, raising her hands and placing them in front of her mouth and nose, reciting Mr. Fool's honorific name in a low voice. She prayed for an angelic blessing again and requested this great existence to tell the world Gehrman Sparrow that she had confirmed when Vin Rambus would arrive and would summon him 2 minutes ahead of time, allowing him to arrive at the appropriate moment. There was no need to be in a rush or to be too close to prevent Vin Rambus from being aware of an ambush. During this process, Audrey only briefly mentioned what had happened. She didn't elaborate on it to prevent wasting any time. Following that, she raised her hands and pressed her cheeks, completely restoring her expression to normal. She began hypnotizing herself, allowing herself to sing the melody the moment she saw Vin Rambus. After doing all of this, Audrey went to the main hall and first found the golden retriever, Susie. She then retrieved the lie necklace and the alcohol nemesis diamond brooch. The latter, which could resist any mental influence, could only be worn for half an hour, otherwise, the damage one's liver and brain suffered would be irreversible. Therefore, Audrey prepared to wear them again after she left Blaine's residence to prevent Vin Rambus from finding her midway. Susie didn't notice anything amiss with Audrey as she watched her wear the brooch and necklace. After a few minutes, Audrey folded a black fishnet glove into her equestrian pocket and used the excuse of going to the washroom, making a detour to Viscount Blaine's garden. Then, she looked at the large clock hung up on the attached tower, her mind tensing up as she memorized the time. To her, she was afraid that Vin Rambus wouldn't come, but she was also worried that he might come early or be late. Time passed by slowly and Audrey used Placate twice to calm herself down. When there was still 2 minutes and 15 seconds left, she took off the feather accessory on her hat and flicked her wrist. The scarlet flames soared, igniting the white feather. This was Lie's flame-controlling ability. As the flames burned, they turned pale. In just 2 or 3 seconds, the feather, which was a product of artificial death, was reduced to ashes. Nothing happened around her. Looking at the clock, Audrey took out a charm made of tin and recited a word in ancient Hermes, lightning. The charm lit up as though many tiny electric snakes were entangling with it. It was a charm that summoned Gehrman Sparrow. When the lightning dissipated, the charm completely disintegrated and melted into the void. However, there was still silence without so much as a sound. Zio and Fors should have found a church of Evernite Cathedral and begun praying. Audrey calmed down and pretended to enjoy the flowers of the remaining autumn days. She didn't lift her head to look at the large clock, counting the time in her heart. 3, 2, 1. She slowly raised her head and looked around, but she didn't see Vin Rambus. He discovered something strange and distanced himself from this place. Audrey's heart tightened as she couldn't help but think back to what she had missed. At that moment, she heard a gentle voice, "What are you looking for?" Audrey's pupils dilated. From the corner of her eye, she realized that the silver-haired, blue-eyed Vin Rambus had appeared beside her at some point in time, a hint of suspicion hidden in his voice. Having already hypnotized herself, she didn't hesitate at all. She followed her subconscious and started humming the melodic "Manna Under the Moon." Amidst the ethereal voice, Vin Rambus calmed down and listened attentively. Suddenly, he realized that the distance between him and Audrey had become very far despite them remaining in their respective spots. The dark night enveloped the garden despite it being late in the afternoon. A huge crimson moon rose over the top of the building as a figure stood there, wearing a black trench coat and a half-top hat. His face looked hazy due to the backlighting. Upon seeing this scene, Vin Rambus immediately extricated himself from that state of calm, clearly aware that he had fallen into a trap. He also further realized that he was already under some sort of influence. Without any hesitation, he arched his back and his body swelled. His pupils turned vertical, turning from pale blue to golden. His face, the back of his hand, and every inch of his exposed skin grew grayish-white scales. Amidst the screeching sound, the white shirt, black vest, formal coat, and straight trousers that he wore tore apart, revealing the dragon scales beneath. In the blink of an eye, Vin Rambus had transformed into an abnormally massive monster. Aside from his head that remained in the form of a human, the rest of his body had changed completely. It was like a dragon that had yet to fully evolve. The dragon's back was covered in gray-skinned wings, and its limbs were thick. The grayish-white scales were engraved with complicated, three-dimensional mysterious symbols. They extended into the flesh, extending into the surrounding void. It seemed to be a mesh of objects that didn't belong to the real world. It threw anyone who laid their eyes upon it into suffering a form of mental confusion as their thoughts warped. Even one's spirit body would be tainted with all kinds of thoughts that came from deep within one's heart, eager to rip apart and mutilate themselves. This was the Spectator Pathway's incomplete mythical creature form. For demigods of other pathways, those who weren't at the angel level, they required immense willpower and firm beliefs to fight in their mythical creature forms. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to control the madness and the inclination of losing control. There was a high chance of them immediately losing all rationality and transforming into a monster. However, the Spectator Pathway was different. They had Placate which could treat their minds and souls, so they weren't helpless towards the madness and inclination of losing control. Therefore, as long as the fight wasn't prolonged, they could use their mythical creature form and return to normal at will. Whoosh! All the thoughts in Vin Rambus's subconscious domain boiled over as they churned, identifying the parts of his consciousness that had been altered, purging him out and melting him down into nothingness. Whoosh! The violent winds surged around Vin Rambus's grayish-white dragon avatar. It seemed to come from reality, but also seemed to come from an illusory world. They carried a certain wool as they whirled in every direction. Any creature that was embroiled would inevitably be placed into various abnormal states, stand rooted to the ground in a daze, or blindly escape towards the corners of the garden. There would be varying degrees of losing of control as their knees would buckle before they slumped to the ground. Some would even faint immediately and fall into a coma. Others would reveal their most fervent expressions, crowding around the dragon-like attendants. This was a qualitative change in dragon might, which stemmed from a mythical creature form. It went from its original state of placing others in a state of awe, to mind deprivation, with even more effects. Seizing the moment when dragon might swept the surroundings, Vin Rambus focused and transformed into illusory, sinister versions of himself. Through the sea of collective subconscious which eluded most beyonders, he approached Gaemon Sparrow on the rooftop and Audrey Hall by the garden's periphery at high speeds. As a spectator, he could tell that the attacker was Gaemon Sparrow just by seeing his face and temperament. At this moment, Audrey was mumbling to herself and compelling herself based on the discussions and warnings from the two demigods, the world and the hermit, above the grey fog. I can't see anything. I can't hear anything. I can't see anything. I can't hear anything. She was trying to avoid losing control from looking directly at Vin Rambus's mythical creature form. However, this also made her unable to see or sense that a particular illusory, sinister version of Vin Rambus was approaching her body of heart and mind from the sea of collective subconscious. But suddenly, before Vin Rambus's eyes, the blonde, green-eyed girl's island of consciousness disappeared. Audrey felt a warmth from her body, as if she had returned from a cold, dark cave to the surface where the sun shined. She hurriedly dispelled the hypnosis and opened her eyes. The sun in the sky pierced through the clouds that couldn't be considered thin, scattering its resplendence. Bathed in the bright golden glow, autumn flowers bloomed in silence. Everything was beautiful and peaceful. Audrey looked around blankly, but she didn't see Vin Rambus, Gaemon Sparrow, or the huge crimson moon. This made her feel like everything that she had just experienced was just a dream. What mighty powers! A battle between the two demigods might not even harm a single flower. Audrey silently muttered to herself before calmly leaving the garden, retreating to the corridor that connected the garden to the house. She was afraid that her presence would affect Gaemon Sparrow's fight. In the concealed world, one of Vin Rambus's manifestations had also landed on Gaemon Sparrow's island of consciousness under the crimson moon. Just as he was about to set foot on it and open the door to the body of heart and mind and control Gaemon Sparrow's subconscious to make him do things against his own will, he realized that the illusory island that stood in the sea of collective subconscious was filled with a deathly silence. There were no stirring thoughts or the appearance of new thoughts. There was no way of influencing it. Puppet. Marionette. Vin Rambus instantly made a judgment. Combined with the information he had obtained in the past, he had a better grasp of Gaemon Sparrow's abilities. He wasn't shocked or depressed. Instead, he felt a sense of glee and confidence. This was because, for a demigod of the spectator pathway, he could easily tell the difference between a marionette and the true body, greatly mitigating Gaemon Sparrow's strongest ability. Besides, do you think a marionette can foil my mind invasion and control of one's consciousness? That sinister and illusory Vin Rambus swept his golden vertical eyes and found a transparent passage on the marionette's island of consciousness. On the island of consciousness, it was the symbolic form of spirit-body threads in the mind world. Right on the heels of that, Vin Rambus's figure flashed, and he traced the transparent passageway and found another island of consciousness hidden in the distance. This was where the source of where the marionettes were controlled, which meant that it belonged to the actual body. Found you. Vin Rambus snorted coldly as he conjured a terrifying mind storm in the sea of collective subconscious, allowing them to thrash about in Gaemon Sparrow's island of consciousness over and over again. This caused the nearby weather to rapidly change, and the ability to percept the surroundings via spirituality suffered intense interference. Vin Rambus took the opportunity to get close to Gaemon Sparrow's island of consciousness, and he conjured a grayish-white staircase in an attempt to furtively invade his opponent's subconscious. This was his usual style of fighting. One stayed in the light while the other stayed in the dark. While one attacked head-on, the other sneaked in. With these two angles of attack, it easily broke the target's mental walls and allowed him to control his opponent's body of heart and mind. At the same time, as a dragon avatar, he flew up and spiraled in midair. It affected Gehrman Sparrow with its dragon might and breath, complementing the battle at the consciousness level. At this moment, from deep within the sea of collective subconscious, Vin Rambus had silently invaded the Gehrman Sparrow's body of heart and mind when all of a sudden, he saw a boundless grayish-white fog. All the sea of collective subconscious around and the islands had vanished. Vin Rambus's heart tightened as he hurriedly analyzed his psyche, suspecting that he was under an illusion. However, no matter how he handled it, the grayish-white fog didn't change. Of course, there were no accidents or danger. It was as if it was just a simple background. That was pretty suspicious. Just as Vin Rambus was preparing to stir a mind storm here, the grayish-white fog finally dissipated, revealing the island of consciousness from before that belonged to Gehrman Sparrow. Vin Rambus didn't have time to hesitate. He quickly entered the corresponding subconscious and attempted to change his target's thoughts. However, those thoughts were dyed with a bright light, a holy and majestic aura. It was unshakable and uninfluenced. Vin Rambus instinctively looked up and looked towards the sea of consciousness from the stone stairs that he conjured. Other than the island itself, there was also a figure with 12 pairs of fiery wings, emitting golden light. It looked like the projection of an angel's powers. Since he was planning on dealing with a demigod from the spectator pathway today, Klein had no doubt used Angel's Embrace on himself. With the Red Priest's level of importance, he directed the powers of the mysterious space above the grey fog, allowing him to temporarily be unaffected when facing an incomplete mythical creature form. And the reason why he didn't show it directly was that he was experimenting with Vin Rambus. As Vin Rambus attempted to invade his island of consciousness, his marionette, Konas Kilgore, distorted the target his enemy locked onto, changing it from Klein's body of heart and mind to Klein's projection of the grey fog. As a result, if Vin Rambus found the island of consciousness in the grayish-white fog, it meant that there was a being of unknown origins sleeping in the mysterious space. This meant that Klein had to be wary ahead of time. On the contrary, he could feel a little relaxed. This was something he had long wanted to test but didn't dare attempt because it might be dangerous. Today, he finally had a chance to do so. After all, even if there were any consequences, Vin Rambus would be the one dying and not him. It might even allow him to easily finish off a demigod. Seeing that he was blessed by an angel and wasn't capable of breaking or infiltrating his opponent's body of heart and mind in a short period of time and exerting his consciousness on him, Vin Rambus retreated without any hesitation. He left the area and returned to his mind world through the sea of collective subconscious. Then, the massive dragon disappeared, disappearing into thin air, preventing Klein from even finding it via spirit body threads. Psychological invisibility. Vin Rambus planned on using a psychological blind spot to hide in the dark. Then, using area of effect beyond powers like mind deprivation and mind storm to slowly weaken Gehrman Sparrow's angel-enhanced mental walls, he would attempt using his own sealed artifact to attack. As a demigod of the spectator pathway, although his dragon form was powerful at melee combat, it still lacked the necessary, powerful offensive beyond powers. It had to be made up for through certain sealed artifacts. At this moment, an illusory book appeared in front of the Gehrman Sparrow who could be either the marionette or his actual self. Following that, there was an ethereal voice: "I came, I saw, I record." Klein was using Lightning Storm, which had been recorded by the Creeping Hunger. For something like psychological invisibility, it could be easily resolved with a full area of effect bombardment. It has to be said that, when dealing with a Beyonder with such a fighting style, the Storm pathway was a pretty good choice. Boom! Lightning bolts descended from the sky, covering the entire area illuminated by the huge crimson moon with a silver forest. Lightning flashed and destructive auras swept over, not leaving any spot unscathed. The giant grayish-white dragon, which still had a human head, appeared again. There were tiny bolts of electric bolts scurrying over its scaled body. There were also some obvious cracks. Vin Rambus's psychological invisibility couldn't be maintained under such a wide area of effect bombardment. After all, his interactions with his surroundings couldn't be avoided. All he could do was eliminate his sense of presence and stay in the blind spot of one's attention. Once the level of interaction grew excessive, he didn't have the means to avoid exposure. As soon as he appeared, the lightning storm calmed down quite significantly. The Gehrman Sparrow's body on the roof instantly blurred and phased into existence diagonally below the incomplete dragon. Right on the heels of that, the glove on the crazy adventurer's left hand protruded with fine black particles that were deep and dark. Then, he opened his mouth and said as word filled with foulness and corruption from the devil language, "Slow." Vin Rambus knew that his opponent was using creeping hunger and knew the true level of the item. He found Gehrman's Sparrow amusing and was about to raise his left claw that grabbed onto an ice blue metal cylinder, slamming it down at his enemy beneath him. This was a sealed artifact with unknown origins called Rotting Meteor. Vin Rambus had obtained it from a particular existence, and he was only aware that part of it came from the cosmos. This ice blue metal cylinder could fire special dark green bullets that would instantly poison anyone who was hit with it. They would begin rotting in a way that even their spirit bodies wouldn't be spared. This was also effective against demigods. Its negative effect was that the wielder had a probability of gaining the attention of the cosmos and suffering corruption without realizing it. If not for having the item sealed thanks to a particular existence, Vin Rambus definitely wouldn't have dared to carry it around. But even so, he tried to limit his usage of it, lest he suffered a strange death or anomaly. That was a common ending for many of the previous owners of Rotting Meteor. Currently, Vin Rambus didn't believe that the language of foulness, which was at most at sequence 5, could affect him in his incomplete mythical creature form. He planned on using Rotting Meteor to finish off the sealed artifact-equipped enemy that posed a threat. However, at this moment, his actions had really slowed down, and his entire body felt stiff. On the pitch-black roof under the gigantic crimson moon, another Gehrman Sparrow in a black trench coat and silk hat had appeared at some point in time. He held a 6-barreled revolver in his right hand and aimed his left hand at the Gehrman Sparrow beneath him before balling his fist and turning his wrist. Earl of the Fallen, Magnify. This was Klein's other marionette, a demigod from the lawyer pathway, Konas Kilgore. With the help of his Magnify, creeping hunger could amplify the beyonder powers it obtained from grazing souls, almost raising it to the level of sequence 4, or in other words, at the level of a demigod. Of course, Magnify couldn't be used consecutively in quick succession. It was limited to a one-time use each time. Due to Vin Rambus's current mythical creature form, no matter how magnified Slow M was, it couldn't affect him for long. Therefore, it was the Gehrman Sparrow, who was actually enemy, who had to seize this short opportunity and control Vin Rambus's spirit body threads. Normally, he would take 3 seconds to retain initial control. However, his opponent had already revealed a powerful mythical creature form, and time would definitely extend the time required. It would take perhaps about 7 seconds or even more than 10 seconds to succeed. And by then, Vin Rambus would have long extricated himself from the influence of Slow, restoring himself to normal and carrying out the corresponding countermeasures. At this critical moment, Konas Kilgore aimed his left hand at winner enemy once again and clenched his fingers. Another Magnify. The control of the spirit body threads was magnified. Suddenly, Anuni's control of Vin Rambus's spirit body threads became easier, as if the mythical creature form hadn't been revealed. In other words, he could obtain initial control in 3 seconds. This was already rather formidable, but the problem was that the dragonified Vin Rambus wouldn't take more than a second to extricate himself from the influence of Slow. No, he had already escaped. At that moment, there was a gunshot. A bullet that looked lusterless, deep and profound but not dark, swiftly shot out with its many strange patterns and struck Vin Rambus, who had just escaped from his slow state. In another corner of the garden, another Gehrman Sparrow in a black trench coat and a silk top hat appeared. Vin Rambus's dragon body stiffened once again. Not only did his thoughts come to a halt, even the wings on his back froze, and he had lost all his control of himself. The entire dragon collapsed to the ground. Control Spirit Bullet. Klein had used his Worms of Spirit as the material to contain the control spirit bullets made from the powers of the mysterious space above the gray fog. It could even freeze sequence 3 Saints for 1 or 2 seconds. At that moment, Vin Rambus, who had an incomplete mythical creature form, wasn't much stronger than a sequence 3 Saint. Back when Eamon's avatar was hit by the control spirit bullet, it had also froze for more than a second. In addition, Klein could also get Konas Kilgore to magnify the power of the bullet. However, to grab the opportunity, he had failed to do it in time. The string of team combination attacks from before had already made Klein turn poignant, as obtaining the aid of a demigod from the lawyer pathway was terrifying. It was very, very effective. Of course, under normal circumstances, the Earl of the Fallen's Magnify could only amplify the effects and influence that strengthened one's body or actions without helping others. However, the problem was that, as marionettes with worms of spirit within them, they were without a doubt no different from Klein. He hadn't been augmenting others, but himself. Seizing the opportunity of Vin Rambus falling into a state of paralysis, Winner Enemy obtained initial control over the spirit body threads. The incomplete dragon had just ended its rigid state when its thoughts became sluggish. Its movement had a certain delay. It had to be said that, after a Bizarro sorcerer obtained a powerful marionette, they could unleash terrifying powers through their cooperation with their marionettes. Klein also had a cheat-like method like control spirit bullets. This was something that could only be created by him because he was the only one who could stir the powers of the mysterious space above the grey fog. Of course, Amon and other powerhouses also had similar charms and bullets. The only difference was the effects would be different. Seeing that Vin Rambus had come under a certain level of control, Klein began preparing to disrupt any form of resistance he tried putting up, preventing him from escaping from his current state until he became a marionette. However, at this moment, his head suddenly ached due to an intolerable mania in his heart. Then, he became extremely down, as if he couldn't feel joy anymore. He despised himself and wished he could give up his life just like that so that he wouldn't be a burden on others. In the blink of an eye, he became excited. His eyes seemed to be blood red and filled with hatred towards anything, wanting to destroy everything he saw. Not good. Before his mental state deteriorated, Klein realized that he had been influenced by Vin Rambus at some point in time. Something was wrong with his body of heart and mind. He hurriedly attempted to cogitate to fight against the abnormal mental state. However, various thoughts that didn't seem to belong to him flashed through his mind. Let's end it here. FCK, think of a way to save yourself. What exactly happened? I think I have a serious mental illness. A psychiatric disease that's contagious. The special mental illness that Miss Justice mentioned. This is indeed a high sequence beyond the power of the spectator pathway. Why are you saying so much? That's a demigod psychiatrist you're facing. Turning him into a marionette will easily resolve this problem. Realizing that Gehrman Sparrow hadn't shot the second bullet, Vin Rambus's face, covered in grayish-white scales, revealed a faint smile. Although he hadn't anticipated the tight cooperation between Gehrman Sparrow and his two marionettes, causing him to quickly fall into a perilous situation, it wasn't like he hadn't done anything prior to this. Before he left the Sea of Collective Subconscious, he had secretly planted contagious madness in a marionette. A marionette was, after all, a dead person. Although it was unable to be controlled by any other methods other than spirit body threads, it didn't mean that they didn't have an island of consciousness. It was just a dead mass, but it was precisely here that Vin Rambus buried a seed, named Madness. The seed couldn't affect the marionette itself, but it could secretly infect the Sea of Collective Subconscious of its surroundings, causing the person who kept switching between bodies to unknowingly place themselves in an environment with a contagious mental disease. Also, this madness could also be transmitted via spirit body threads. In addition, this type of infection stemmed from one's self. It wasn't something an angelic blessing could screen. At most, it would be weakened and have the effects weakened. This was a high-sequence spectator's power, manipulator's mental plague. In ancient times, there would be people from time to time who were placed in repressed states for prolonged periods of time and appear abnormal at the same time. Their abnormality influenced the people around them, causing mass hysteria to happen. An ancient folk song once sang of it in such a manner: 7 young ladies are dancing weirdly on the street, 9 men are rolling on the ground laughing by their sides, on a horse carriage passing by, the nobles are slapping their faces, the stone children are crying outside the house by the street, people are hurting each other. The entire city is crazy. If one thought about it carefully, it would make one feel an inexplicable sense of horror. However, Vin Rambus knew that the scene described in the myth was true. It was an experiment from a spectator pathway demigod. A highly contagious mental plague. By the time Gehrman Sparrow's actual body went crazy, his control over his marionettes would undoubtedly be lost. When that happened, Vin Rambus would be able to escape from his predicament. It wouldn't take long, as it only took a few seconds. At that moment, a manipulator like Vin Rambus wasn't afraid that Gehrman Sparrow had the charm which Audrey had used, the one that could temporarily swap fates between two people. This was because a swap would put Gehrman Sparrow in a state of becoming a marionette. His thoughts would turn sluggish and his body would stiffen. As for Vin Rambus, being infected by the mental plague was a relatively simple problem for him to resolve. At this moment, Vin Rambus saw the Gairman Sparrow on the rooftop aiming his left hand at the Gairman Sparrow who was holding the iron-black, long-barreled revolver. He gripped his fingers and slowly turned his wrist. Distortion. Cline had used Konas Kilgore's Beyond powers to distort the level of his mental disease, weakening it and slowing down the deterioration. Making use of this period in which he had clarity of mind, he raised Death Knell again and pulled the trigger. Bang! Another control spirit bullet shot out and hit the motionless, massive incomplete dragon. At the same time, Konas Kilgore used Magnify. Despite being attacked, Vin Rambus didn't escape from Anani's control, because he had fallen into a long period of feeling numb and stiff. Cline silently kept count of the time, shooting a third control spirit bullet before Vin Rambus truly recovered. And before the third control spirit bullet's magnified effects ended, the grayish-white, incomplete dragon trembled as it returned to normal, no longer looking sluggish. In the dimly lit world, the gigantic crimson moon hung silently over the house while everything in the garden seemed to be asleep. The despair in the incomplete grayish-white dragon's eyes dissipated as it retracted its skin-covered wings, behaving like a docile hunting dog reared at home. The psychology alchemist's counselor, demigod of the spectator pathway, Vin Rambus, had lost his life and became Cline's marionette. Without bothering to enjoy this achievement, he switched places with Anani, who was beside the grayish-white dragon, appearing as Gairman Sparrow in his black trench coat and silk top hat. Then, he controlled his new marionette to treat the infection he received from mental plague. A gentle and cool breeze swept past the sea of collective subconscious, seeping into Cline's island of consciousness. It made him feel like the object reeking of a rotten, putrid, and discordant object in his body of heart and mind was being purged out of him with a surgical knife. Cline's face immediately contorted as he grimaced. He once again felt the excruciating pain in his soul. Thankfully, in order to create the control spirit bullets and the yesterday once more charms, he was already accustomed to this feeling. He didn't hold his head and roll around. After purging the contagious mental disease from his consciousness, the cool wind brought about a warmth that made him want to take an afternoon nap. It allowed his damaged spirit body to relax as if he was soaked in a bath. His mind and body quickly recovered thanks to the nourishment. By the time he recovered from his mental disease, the gentle breeze that blew at him became intense. It swept the surroundings, wiping out all the contagion left in the air. After doing all of this, Cline made the grayish-white dragon rapidly shrink its body, converge its godhood, and turn back into its human form. However, as Vin Rambus' clothes had been ripped to pieces, the gray scales on his body didn't disappear. A few seconds later, the ascetic leader of the Church of Evernite, Ariana, walked out of the gigantic crimson moon in her simple robe and belt made of tree bark. Her long black hair cascaded down as she stepped across the void and arrived diagonally above Vin Rambus. The angel stretched out her right hand and, with a gentle squeeze, let Vin Rambus's blurry soul leave his body and float above his head. "Why are you helping George III?" Ariana asked directly. Vin Rambus's confused expression immediately turned serious. "This is the choice of the times, an inevitability of destiny. We are just following the flow of the tides and providing some guidance, allowing the times to develop in the right direction." The standard answer of the Twilight Hermit Order. From the looks of it, the psychology alchemist's demigod doesn't know what Adam's true goal is either. Even as official members of the Twilight Hermit Order, most of them probably don't know. Cline didn't have any problems thinking thanks to his situation inside the concealed world. Ariana didn't show any surprise as she pressed, "What is the trend of the times?" Vin Rambus's eyes were unfocused, but his expression was solemn as he answered, "A war, one that will sweep the entire world." "This, isn't peace nice?" Cline frowned slightly as he couldn't help but mumble inwardly. He knew very well what a world war would do to humans. He only wished that his investigation with the Church of Evermite would be able to seize the key and successfully prevent the war which the Twilight Hermit Order was strongly pushing from erupting. Ariana fell silent for a second before asking, "What's the secret George III is hiding?" Vin Rambus revealed a smile. "Every king is restrained by 3 major contracts and can only reach a limit of sequence 5. But with our help, he bypassed the restrictions and has already reached a higher level. Once the tides of the times come, he'll easily be able to ascend to the spot that should have belonged to him." 3 major contracts. What's that? It's understandable to limit a king to sequence 5 due to the strong push to keep mysticism under wraps. It's best for a king to be changed normally. The people will find it acceptable if they could live for 80 to 90 years old, but to still be active at 120 to 130 years will be the cause for conspiracy theories and panic. George III cooperated with the psychology alchemists and the demoness sect to live longer. Typically, this is a restriction on the king, not the other members of the Augustus family. They should have grounded angels among them, so there's no reason for them to support George III. Many questions arose in his mind. George III still isn't a demigod, is he? Is he using some method to possess a higher level and perform the acting ahead of time? Ariana asked unhurriedly. To the Church of Evernite, this was a crucial problem. If George III was already a demigod, they could directly contact the Church of Storms and Steen to capture him because the king himself was enough evidence. Vin Rambus's soul nodded and said, yes. What is the exact method? Ariana continued asking. Vin Rambus slowly shook his head and said, I'm not sure. The person in charge of this matter is our president. I only remember him once mentioning that he wanted George III to have more talent. More talent. Upon hearing such a description, Klein instantly thought of something in Roselle's diary. In the eyes of the emperor, the so-called talent was to make one's psyche and soul more like a high-level ancestor, as such be able to obtain the recognition of the corresponding beyonder characteristics or the mental imprint within sealed artifacts, allowing them to easily consume the potion and wield the sealed artifacts without the immense negative effects. This wasn't a perfect solution. It could even be said that there were great latent risks. This was because the mental imprint would revert and control the consumer or wielder's soul, causing them to experience certain changes. If anyone were to rely on this method to advance to a demigod, there was an extremely high chance of becoming a monster formed of mental sutures. Was George III hypnotized? He actually accepted such a method. No, if he was hypnotized, the Augustus family's angel or sealed artifacts would definitely discover the problem. Klein became even more puzzled as he waited for the ascetic leader floating in the sky to ask further. Ariana clearly knew what more talent meant. Without any change in expression, she asked, who is your president? Vin Rambus revealed a look of reminiscence. He has many identities and names, but I can confirm that he is the president of our psychology alchemists as long as I see him. His current identities and names are, one of the four kings of the sea, the king of the Black Throne Barros Hopkins, the former chancellor of the Backland Medical School, the royal family's medical consultant, the already dead, Paulie Durlaw, the famous ascetic of the Central Sonia Sea, Eric Drake, king of the Black Throne. It was only then that he realized that he had heard of this title, but he had always neglected it, not taking it to heart and seldom thinking about it. So this pirate king is from the Spectator Pathway. He nodded in enlightenment. Ariana listened quietly and asked, what secret is George III hiding in the Blood Emperor ruins? Vin Rambus's slightly dazed expression changed slightly. An extremely important thing. If he wants to grasp it, he will need a large number of sacrificial rituals. What is it? Ariana pressed without any pause. Vin Rambus was taken aback. I don't remember. He suddenly raised his hand to grip his soul's head, clearly in pain. However, no matter how he thought about it, he couldn't remember the answer. Was this memory forcefully deleted by Adam or a certain angel from the Spectator Pathway? Klein watched with a heavy expression as he felt that the secret in the ruins was more important than he imagined. Ariana fell silent for a few seconds before lowering her head and asking Klein, do you have anything you want to ask? Klein thought for a moment and asked Vin Rambus, what is the name of the high sequence beyonder potions of the Spectator Pathway? The pain in Vin Rambus's soul lessened as he slowly replied, Sequence 4 Manipulator. Sequence 3 Dreamweaver. Sequence 2 Discerner. Sequence 1 Author. He didn't mention Sequence 0 Visionary, clearly unaware. What's the potion formula for Manipulator? Although Klein felt that his question was rather substandard compared to Ma'am Ariana's, he still asked. In a dazed tone, Vin Rambus said without hesitation, the main ingredient is an elderly mind dragon's complete brain, or the crystalline heart of a tree mentor, or a beyonder characteristic of a manipulator. The supplementary ingredients are 80 milliliters of the blood of an elderly mind dragon, 3 golden leaves of a tree mentor, and 7 different drops of tears from different humans or non-human creatures that were shed due to intense emotions. The ritual is that on a special occasion with at least 10,000 people, drink the potion when they are in the midst of an emotional resonance. In contrast, the difficulty of a demigod ritual of the Spectator Pathway isn't that high. That's right. Spectators can heal and analyze themselves, allowing them to effectively deal with the madness and the loss of control brought about by the potion, so the ritual can be simplified. Klein nodded in thought. What's the potion formula for Dreamweaver? I don't know. Vin Rambus shook his head. Alright then. Klein asked Vin Rambus why he had personally come to Audrey and received the corresponding answer. Then, he said to Ariana, I have no further questions. The questions he had couldn't be answered by Vin Rambus. Ariana's right hand pressed softly, causing Vin Rambus's soul to return to his body. Following that, the angel glanced at Klein and said calmly, don't use him as a marionette. Before his mental imprint is removed, it's best you don't use his Beyonder characteristic to create items. Of course, I don't want Adam to visit me. Klein nodded sincerely. I will remember it. Thank you, Ma'am Ariana. After thanking her, Klein immediately gave up his control over Vin Rambus, making it impossible for him to maintain his marionette-like state. With that, this spectator pathway demigod collapsed to the ground and became a corpse. Ariana lowered her head and took a look, the darkness in her eyes growing deeper. Vin Rambus's corpse immediately got erased like a pencil drawing, as if it was being wiped away by an eraser, inch by inch, leaving behind only the ice blue metal cylinder. Right on the heels of that, beams of light seeped out of the void and quickly gathered together, forming a strange object. It was fist-sized and looked like a heart. However, it resembled a different kind of brain, with its surface being covered in grayish-white wrinkles, each crevice with countless symbols and strange patterns that extended into the surroundings. These connected to a world that Beyonders of other pathways couldn't see. This was the Beyonder characteristic left behind by a manipulator. Miss Ariana's concealment and reversing concealment process is able to quickly extract Vin Rambus's Beyonder characteristic. Klein came to a realization after a moment of pause. At this moment, Ariana calmly said, the mental imprints in it have all been removed. Thank you, Ma'am Ariana. Not surprised at all, he bowed as if he had prepared to do so. He had decisively given up on his marionette because he foresaw that something like this would happen. In fact, his original plan was to bring Vin Rambus above the grey fog as a marionette, allowing him to use Unshadowed Crucifix to purge the manipulator, dreamwalker, hypnotist, and other Beyonder characteristics out. This way, Miss Justice no longer needed to worry about the ingredients needed before becoming a demigod. Even her Beyonder dog at home had a chance of advancing. After all, Audrey had briefly mentioned in the past to Dwayne Dantes that her act of escaping from Vin Rambus's control was all thanks to Susie. But later on, he considered that there was no way he could bring Vin Rambus above the grey fog inside this world of concealment, as it would directly expose the fact that he was the fool under Ariana's watchful eyes. And once he left, no matter where he teleported to, there was a chance of being discovered by Adam because of Vin Rambus's existence. In that case, giving up a marionette in front of Ariana was undoubtedly a better choice. At least, this angel had a high chance of helping him remove the mental imprint on the Beyonder characteristic. And none of these affected Klein's original plan. He could easily find some ingredients to make Vin Rambus's Beyonder characteristic into a problematic potion. He would then pour it onto an ordinary item so that it could absorb the potion and transform. After obtaining such a sealed artifact and binding it with the Unshadowed Crucifix, he could obtain the corresponding Beyonder characteristics by keeping track of the time. As for the mental corruption during this process, there was no need for concern. The Unshadowed Crucifix could also cleanse it. Klein picked up Vin Rambus's Beyonder characteristic, but he wasn't able to stuff it into the iron cigar case. He could only stuff it into his pocket. As for Ariana, she cast her gaze towards the ice blue metal cylinder and said in an unhurried voice, "It's from the cosmos, so it's best you don't use it. Even you carrying it with you should be limited. Otherwise, a gaze might be cast onto you, causing you to be corrupted and suffer aberrations." From the cosmos. Klein found the description familiar. Soon, he remembered the origins of its familiarity. This originated from the yellow light, Venethon's prophecy of the apocalypse in sites in the spirit world, from the Abraham family, casting one's gaze from the cosmos, the lands shatter. Everything in the world will cease to exist. The apocalypse. The origins of this sealed artifact is related to the apocalypse. What does the cosmos represent? What does it have to do with the astral world? A series of questions formed in his mind, making his expression turn heavy. Faced with his question, Ariana nodded gently and said, "Yes, the cosmos." "Is it the cosmos above our heads?" He pointed at the dark night sky which was embedded with the gigantic crimson moon. "Yes." Ariana gave an affirmative answer, but she didn't explain further. After some thought, he asked again, "There are many hostile existences that are attempting to destroy this world." Ariana's gaze swept across his face and finally stopped at his eyes. "I can't give you an answer. There are some things that make it easier to be infected, the more you know. Both your body and soul will be infected. Once you become an angel, you can seek out the exact answer. The more I know, the easier it is to get infected." A chill ran down Klein's back. He didn't ask Rhodes earlier about the sealed artifacts that Vin Rambus possessed, because he was afraid that Adam would notice them if they left any traces behind. When facing a king of angels, no amount of caution was enough. Seeing that Ariana wasn't revealing anything else, Klein pointed at the ice blue metal cylinder and asked, "How should we handle this item?" The description of the ascetic leader made him a little afraid of bringing the sealed artifact above the gray fog to disinfect. Ariana calmly said, "My suggestion is to sacrifice it to the goddess. Together with the contributions you have previously rendered, you can exchange them for what you want." Klein nodded slightly. "I understand." After expressing his gratitude, Ariana's figure was quickly erased and disappeared into the dark garden under the abnormally huge moon. And with that, the world of concealment collapsed. Klein observed for a few seconds before taking out candles and other ritual items he carried with him. He quickly set up an altar and sacrificed the ice blue metal cylinder to the Evernite goddess. At the end of the ritual, amidst the howling winds, the burning ash of the herbs and the surrounding soil rose up and landed onto an empty spot on the altar. The ash and soil were connected, forming words. Sequence 3, Scholar of Yore, main ingredients, Hound of Fulgrim, also known as Sephira Castle Keeper, pair of eyes. 1 demonic wolf of fog's transformed heart. Supplementary ingredients, 100 ml of Hound of Fulgrim blood, 30 grams of white frost crystal of demonic wolf of fog, a large amount of real ancient historical records. Advancement ritual, be separated from reality for at least 300 years and consume the potion after one becomes history and doesn't belong to the present era. This, Klein couldn't help but blink, wondering if he had seen the wrong description. The description of not belonging to the present era made him think of a line in his honorific name, "The fool that doesn't belong to this era." I've been hanging above the extraordinary door of light for more than 300 years. In a sense, have I already completed the ritual and am only waiting to consume the potion? The mysterious space above the gray fog really has a very close relationship with the seer pathway. Could it be the manifestation of the uniqueness? Klein was momentarily delighted but also grim. This was because he didn't know if a price was exacted for such a bestowment. Phew, I really want to jump to a neighboring pathway after becoming an angel to not follow whatever path was planned for me. For other Bizarro sorcerers, the hardest part about the advancement ritual is to live for more than 300 years. After all, this isn't a pathway that's known for having a long lifespan. Also, being separated from reality for 300 years easily drives one mad. For Bizarro sorcerers who are in a dissociative state, the risk of madness and losing control is quite significant. Klein looked at the Scholar of Yore's potion formula as thoughts couldn't help but flash through his mind. After an unknown amount of time, he ended the ritual and put away the corresponding items. As he walked out of the garden, the gigantic crimson moon and the pitch-black darkness faded away, disappearing inch by inch. Then, he saw fresh autumn flowers and the sunlight shining above them. He also saw a blonde girl waiting in between the house and the garden. Audrey's eyes wore an elated look as the corners of her lips curled up unconsciously. Klein nodded at her before his figure was enveloped by scarlet flames. Elsewhere in the garden, there was another flame soaring in the air, but it wasn't obvious. When the flames dissipated, Gehrman Sparrow was gone. The remnants of the crimson moon and the night scenery vanished completely. Audrey fell into a daze for a few seconds before thoughtfully looking away and entering Viscount Blaint's residence. After she left in a carriage with Susie and the servants, she returned home and had a chance to be alone. As expected, she received the world's invitation for a meeting. Above the grey fog, inside the palace. Audrey looked at the world Gehrman Sparrow and calmly asked, what was Vin Rambus's true goal? She had long known from Gehrman Sparrow's calm composure that Vin Rambus had been finished off. Klein answered frankly, the first is to find out if there's a mastermind behind Zio and Force's actions. Secondly, when the princes expressed the goodwill towards Earl Hall's family, the cue was for you to not be an obstacle. In essence, it's to create a fracture between the three major churches. With regards to this matter, Audrey had already discussed it with Mr. World before. There was no need to seek further explanations as she asked, then why was a demigod like Vin Rambus personally visiting me? Klein smiled and said, if you wish to deceive the guards arranged by Earl Hall, as well as hypnotize a hypnotist with great certainty without causing any commotion, a Sequence 5 might not be capable of doing so, therefore, it's best to send a demigod. Furthermore, you knew Vin Rambus and had interactions with him before, so your vigilance against him would be minimized. To be honest, if you weren't careful enough and had an unnoticeable helper like Susie, the whole matter would have gone on smoothly without you and I knowing until Monday. Justice Audrey didn't wear a thick mask. She smiled and sighed with mixed emotions. So I'm already this powerful. Powerful to the point of needing a demigod to be certain of success. He was even more powerful than I had imagined. You actually hypnotized a demigod that's good at hypnotism, Klein praised with a smile. Audrey pursed her lips without realizing it and smiled. That's mainly because of the fate siphon charm you gave me. My hypnotist potion seems to have completely digested as a result of this. Completely digested. That's understandable. This is the act of hypnotizing a demigod. Although it's thanks to the fate siphon charm, it only helped to open the door of the body of heart and mind. The subsequent consciousness manipulation and the Q planting needs to be done personally. If she weren't careful, she would trigger an intense rejection and would lead to failure. Acting, done to the extreme, would definitely accelerate the digestion process. Klein nodded gently and said in praise, this is a good thing. It's even more so for the current situation. Audrey understood what Mr. World meant. In this storm that was sweeping around thanks to the angel of imagination Adam and King George III, even if she stood by the sidelines, she could sense her weakness and how powerless she was. She couldn't wait to improve herself. She tersely acknowledged and said, I'll urge the Sun to give his conditions to complete the deal and try my best to advance to Sequence 5. When the time comes, I hope that I can receive the protection of Mr. Fool and remain conscious in my dream. Having been prepared for this, Klein smiled and said, actually, you don't have to wait that long. I'll be able to sell you a Dreamwalker's Beyond a characteristic by tomorrow, and at the latest, Friday. As it was a private exchange, Klein didn't act as the world by deliberately making his voice hoarse. All he did was sound reserved. Really? Audrey's eyes widened, not concealing her surprise. Klein nodded and said, it's actually from Vin Rambus. The new cross that Mr. Fool obtained can allow the Beyonder characteristics to be purged. He spoke very simply without explaining the actual steps. He maintained Gehrman Sparrow's unique coldness. Is that so? The corners of Audrey's lips curled up as she broke into a smile. She pressed against her chest and said, praise Mr. Fool. And thank you, Mr. World. A double token of gratitude. Klein chuckled inwardly and calmly said, it's just a transaction. You need to pay for it, he lampooned to himself. Audrey maintained her smile and asked, what do you need? For a Sequence 5 Beyonder characteristic, £8,000. Klein chose something that Miss Justice could gather in the fastest time possible. Audrey didn't mind the price. She thought for a while before asking, can you sell the separated hypnotist characteristic to me as well? When she said that, she smiled in embarrassment and said, it's for Susie. The incident this time was resolved all thanks to her. Yes, the higher her level, the greater the help she can provide will be. Well, I'll also help her. No problem. £4,000. Having expected this, Klein directly named his price. In his plan, he could stop once the hypnotist was purged, doing so without continuing the separation process. Now, he would place the unshadowed crucifix together for a long period of time, allowing its remaining characteristics to take form. A total of £12,000. Audrey asked for confirmation, not feeling too much pressure. As she didn't have any major expenditures for the past few months, she only had £10,000 left. Just a little bit of economizing was enough to satisfy her needs. Seeing the world nod, she heaved a sigh of relief. I'll pay it before Friday. After closing the deal, her mood became better with Vin Rambus having been killed. She asked as though she was chatting, I'll also buy the complete brain of an adult mind dragon from the Sun as well. However, I won't be in such a rush. Susie won't be able to digest the hypnotist potion so quickly. At this point, she glanced shyly at Mr. World. What needs to be exchanged for Vin Rambus's demigod characteristic? Klein laughed and replied, I still don't know what I'm lacking. In fact, other than the manipulator characteristic from Vin Rambus, I also have the corresponding potion formula. While you digest the Dreamwalker potion, I'll slowly think about what I need, and I'll get you to do certain things and gather some materials so that you can make sufficient contributions to exchange for them." Upon hearing these words, Audrey's green eyes lit up. "All right." After her reply, she asked with interest, "Is this the same as how Zio contributes to MI9? "Yes, it's also the same method that the various major churches use." Klein gave an affirmative answer. Audrey nodded and curiously asked, "Mr. World, do you know the name of the high sequence beyond the potions of the spectator pathway?" Klein answered simply, "Manipulator, Dreamweaver, Discerner, Author, and Sequence 0, Visionary. Hearing the names makes me look forward to them. Especially Author and Visionary." Audrey fantasized for a few seconds before diverting the topic back on track. Did Vin Rambus say what the king's secret is? Also, why are they helping the king? She was partially asking for Zio, but on the other hand, she was also concerned herself. The king's secret. He wishes to bypass the 3 major contracts the royal family signed with the Orthodox churches and become a demigod. For this, he needs to use many sacrificial rituals to gain control of some important object inside the Blood Emperor's ruins. Hey, that was Vin Rambus's answer, but it might not be the entire truth and might very likely be only a part of it. As Klein answered, he shared his line of thought. As for the psychology alchemists or the Twilight Hermit Order, they need a war that sweeps the entire world. This is what they're pushing for and hope to see as the trend of the times. A war that sweeps the entire world. Audrey repeated softly. Her pretty eyebrows furrowed slightly, and her cheerful mood plummeted again. Although her status and standing hadn't made her truly experience the cruelty of war before, she was no longer sheltered and cut off from the world. She could already imagine it to a certain degree. After a brief moment of silence, Audrey took a deep breath and forced a smile. "I hope we can stop this." After exchanging a few more words, she left the grey fog and returned to the real world. As for Klein, he busily used clear water, tree sap, herbal powder, thousand-faced hunter's blood, spirit world plunderer powder, and other materials to dilute Vin Rambus's beyond a characteristic and concoct a potion that had a questionable name which was definitely filled with problems. Then, he found an ordinary glass bottle and put the potion inside. He wanted to know what kind of sealed artifact it would eventually transform into. This took quite a bit of time, so he used the power of the mysterious space above the grey fog to construct a spherical barrier around the glass bottle to prevent any influence it had on the entire area after it mutated. After doing all of this, he returned to 160 Bockland Street. He prepared to summon a Rhodes and ask it for information about the 2 Beyonder creatures known as Hound of Fulgrim and Demonic Wolf of Fog. At that moment, with the passage of time, the clouds in the sky had thickened, and the sun was covered up once again. The entirety of Backland had become as dark and cold as the morning. Standing in front of the desk, he looked out the window at the sky. For some reason, he felt as though he and the Church of Evernight had neglected an important problem. Their investigations had been going relatively smoothly during this period of time, and the intelligence they received was also delving deeper. However, for some reason, it made him feel uneasy. Is there some influence or misdirection in this matter, and truly is something that I can't think of? Even heading above the grey fog is useless. Divination will most likely point towards him. Klein hurriedly collected his thoughts, unfurled the paper, and drew a picture consisting of symbols that implied concealment and mystery prying with a fountain pen. 1 second, 2 seconds. After nearly 8 seconds, the full-body mirror in the room turned dark. Aqueous light rippled and formed silver words. Exalted Great Master, your puny, loyal, and humble servant, Rhodes, is here to answer your summoning. I think I'm late. I'm already a Grade 1 sealed artifact. I need some time if I want to circumvent the isolation. Please forgive me, Great Master. You're a Grade 1 sealed artifact? Klein asked with a surprised look. He could already imagine what was going on within the Church of Steam. The mirror that likes to play question and answer games has suddenly gone crazy. The full-body mirror's silver words squirmed and formed new words. Great Master, is this a question? He wanted to answer, no, but to maintain his image, he nodded and said, yes. Rhodes immediately produced a line of words. I'm not actually a true Grade 1 sealed artifact yet. I'm just enjoying the treatment of a Grade 1 sealed artifact in advance. This is mainly because a Grade 1 sealed artifact needs to be reported to other churches and be given a new number. The Church of Steam doesn't wish to do so. So that's how it is. That's understandable. Klein nodded gently. Got it. The aqueous light on the full-body mirror's surface flashed again as new silver words formed. Supreme Master, do you have any questions to test your loyal servant, Rhodes? What do you know about hounds of Fulgrim and demonic wolves of fog? He asked without standing on ceremony, completely unfazed that it was actually 2 questions. In the mirror, the silver words squirmed like they had a life of their own and changed shapes. The hounds of Fulgrim are a type of unique creature of the spirit world. They live in the historical void. Even the 7 lights only know of them and are unable to interact with them unless they leave the historical void and attempt to hunt. But even so, what you see might only be a projection of their past. The demonic wolves of fog are a type of high-level demonic wolves. After the death of the ancient gods and the Cataclysm, and with them being killed by the Antigonus family, Zaratul family, and the Church of Evernite, they're extremely rare now. Furthermore, they're all good at anti-divination and deceit. They aren't easy to find. In other words, the Church of Evernite likely has materials and items related to the demonic wolf of fog. And with this, I can bring it to the spirit world and use the law of beyond a characteristic convergence to bait a hound of Fulgrim. Klein began his train of thought as he read on. After getting a grasp of the situation, Klein looked at the full-body mirror in the room and asked, "What's the king's secret?" The surface of the mirror that seemed to lead to another world had aqueous light ripple before revealing a scene. It was a ruin that was hidden deep in the darkness, covered in the dust of history. However, it was completely intact. Does that mean that the king's secret is in the Blood Emperor's ruins? Rhodes doesn't dare to answer directly, or is this as much as it can see? After some deliberation, he said to the magic mirror, "It's your turn to ask." The image in the full-body mirror didn't change at all. It only revealed silver words. "Great Master, do you have any other questions?" "Yes." Without standing on ceremony, Klein nodded and asked, "Where is Saintess of White, Katerina, presently?" In the mirror, the silver words rapidly faded and disappeared, but the background didn't change at all. It was still the Blood Emperor ruins. If not for the words appearance and disappearance, I would have thought that this magic mirror crashed. Katerina is hiding in the Blood Emperor's ruins. The real one. Klein nodded thoughtfully. "It's your turn." Above the scene, silver words condensed once again. "Benevolent Master, why don't you leave Backland?" "That's a good question. I originally had such plans. I originally investigated the Great Smog of Backland because of my outrage over the innocent deaths of the poor like old Kola, as well as being lost due to the shattering of my main goal. Later, I ended up with the identity as a blessed of the goddess. Later on, I tried to prevent a disaster from happening and prevent the people I know from suffering due to the ambitions of the powerful and to not drown because of the tides of the times. I was willing to bear some of the risks. As for now, knowing that there might be a war that would sweep the entire world, and discovering that the advancement ritual of Scholar of Yore is practically tailor-made for me, with signs of things being arranged, I've already come to a realization that I might not be able to escape even if I tried. Or should I say that I'm unlikely to escape my destiny even if I were to flee Backland? In that case, I might as well take the initiative to face the risk head-on and see if I can figure out the truth and find a chance to survive, grasping my fate in my own hands. Klein's thoughts kept churning before they settled. Following that, he calmly replied, "Leaving can't really solve the problem." With that, he asked, "Where is Tracy now?" The full-body mirror finally changed the depicted scene. This time, it was pitch black. Occasionally, thick objects would slip across the surface. Rhodes also can't see Trissy's situation. Klein nodded slightly and said, "It's your turn to ask." The mirror was filled with aqueous light and wisps of silver formed a sentence. "Great Master, I have something to tell you." "May I?" "Go ahead," Klein replied, somewhat curious. The silver words changed into new words. "You have to be careful with what follows next." It even used an exclamation point. Rhodes noticed something unpleasant. After thinking for a few seconds, Klein said, "What do you think can threaten me?" "I don't know. I have a feeling." Rhodes reorganized its words, turning them from silver to grayish-white. It was obvious that it meant to express its sadness and self-reproach. Without waiting for a reply, new grayish-white words appeared in the mirror one after another. "Great Master, I have another scene to show you." "Is that okay?" "Sure," Klein spoke slowly. The full-body mirror's surface produced ripples as the pitch-black darkness changed. It became deeper and deeper, sparkling like diamonds. This was a beautiful and vast night. The scene that Rhodes displayed is directed at the goddess who's intrinsically the stars, or it's the gaze cast from the cosmos. It seems like it doesn't dare to express it directly. Klein considered for a moment and didn't attempt to ask further. Let's end it here for today. Alright. The grayish-white words were once again dyed with silver as the speed at which they appeared had slowed down for some reason. Great Master, why you haven't said that you would summon me, your loyal servant, Rhodes, again if you have other questions in the future. It's a mirror that needs to follow procedure. Klein said in amusement, of course, I'll summon you again when I have other questions. Yes, Master. Goodbye, Master. The silver words on the mirror returned to their normal speed, forming a hand that kept waving. After everything returned to normal, Klein burned the paper with the summoning symbols and drew the curtains. He once again stared at the cold and dark sky. Empress Borough, in a small Evernite cathedral. Zio and Fours received Miss Justice's update thanks to Mr. Fool, and they knew that the problem had been resolved. They roughly understood what the king's secret was. Truly impressive. Fours, who believed in the god of steam and machinery, opened her eyes in the dark and quiet prayer hall, turned her head, lowered her voice, and sighed. She originally wanted to directly say that Mr. World or Gairman Sparrow was truly impressive, but she no longer wanted to make such a mistake. The past week made her feel like she had been in the mysterious world for more than 10 years. Zio opened her eyes as well, but she first drew a crimson moon on her chest, a form of showing her penitence towards her disrespect for the goddess. Yes, that's a. Before Zio could finish her sentence, the message she tried to convey reached Fours. What she wanted to say was that Vin Rambus was a true demigod, but from the time she and Fours entered the cathedral, less than 10 minutes had passed, yet, he had been finished off by Gairman Sparrow. As saints, there was such a huge gap. Perhaps, it's the blessings of an angel. With her experience in supernatural events and writing novels, Fours made a vague guess. As the prayer hall was dark and quiet, making it unsuitable for communication, Zio didn't directly respond to Fours' words. She nodded, stood up, and walked into the aisle. The two of them left the prayer area, and after approaching the door, Zio exhaled and said, I really hope that I'll be this powerful one day. I have such thoughts occasionally too. Fours smiled. No matter what, you've already completed your investigations, haven't you? Although the so-called secrets are definitely worth digging into, the outline of the matter is rather clear. Zio looked at the door ahead of her and fell into a daze for a few seconds. But what's the point? I can't do anything about this matter. No. When it comes to enemies, that person's identity isn't too lofty. At least, he's someone we can look at directly. Fours seriously comforted her friend. When you obtain a qualitative change in strength, you'll discover that you have the ability to participate in that matter. At least in matters that don't involve even higher levels. Fours, who had joined the Tarot Club for quite a long time ago, had witnessed matters that had been planned by Mr. Fool. He had used his blessed and the members of the Tarot Club to destroy the descent of the true creator, revealed Banshee's secret, obtained a portion of the authority from the Storm Domain, and interfered in the ownership of 008. Compared to the angels, King of Angels, and even true gods that were involved in these matters, King George III alone was indeed nothing special. Zio slowly walked to the door and said after a moment of silence, I understand what you mean. We'll return to the East District. We won't be in a hurry to move. Once I obtain the Judge Potion formula, we'll disappear and go into hiding. I believe that after today's incident, they probably wouldn't dare to investigate us. That's for sure. They're just lurking in the dark, in spots that cannot see the light of day, Fours hurriedly echoed before exclaiming, I only hope that before we move again, my letter to my teacher can be delivered. Zio grabbed her yellow hair and walked out of the church gates as she said in a serious manner, after I get the formula, I'll buy that button and try to advance as quickly as possible. Not bad. You've recovered your fighting spirit, Fours teased with a smile. Zio didn't say another word as she continued proceeding forward with a solemn expression. After walking a few dozen steps, she suddenly stopped and said without turning her head, I don't think I have enough money to buy that button. When the time comes, lend me a little. I'll definitely return it. Fours was taken aback for a second before chortling. Okay, if my guess is correct, I should be able to get the subsequent items from my teacher. Thursday afternoon. Using the excuse of having some rest, Klein returned to the master bedroom and entered the bathroom. He took 4 steps counterclockwise and arrived above the grey fog. He believed that the glass bottle that was filled with the potion had already finished absorbing it. Sitting at the high back chair of the Fool, he waved his hand and removed the isolation barrier, pulling his target over. The transparent glass bottle was already stained with a dark color. It had a mesh pattern on its surface which shimmered slightly, giving off an artistic flair. It was empty inside, with not a single drop of the potion remaining. The spacious bottle's mouth was covered with a layer of mist that glowed. It made Klein feel as though his gaze was being sucked in the moment it landed upon the mouth of the bottle. A voice sounded from the bottle: "By throwing in 100 gold coins in it, you can fulfill a wish. By throwing in 100 gold coins in it, you can fulfill a wish." Who did you learn this from? I have to say, this monotonous statement does have some hypnotic effect. Throwing in 100 gold coins would be akin to opening the doors of the body of heart and mind and becoming the bottle's slave. Klein did a simple analysis before beckoning for the unshadowed crucifix. Using the pressure brought about by the grey fog, he stuffed it into the bottle's mouth. "You devil!" The voice in the bottle screamed shrilly before it was miserably blocked by the grey fog. After dealing with the mutated glass bottle, Klein took out his golden pocket watch, opened it, took a look, and took note of the time. He had to return 3 hours later and separate the unshadowed crucifix from the bottle of slavery. Only then could he obtain a single manipulator's beyond a characteristic, and not a product that was mixed with the previous sequences beyond the characteristics. "It feels like I'm doing an experiment." Klein nodded slightly, put away his pocket watch, and returned to the real world where he had his actual afternoon nap. At 4 in the afternoon, his valet, Enony, knocked on his employer's door under Butler Walter's watch. "What's the matter?" In his pajamas, Dwayne Dantes rubbed his forehead and opened the bedroom door. Enony bowed and said, "Sir, you accepted Madame Rihanna's invitation for high tea the night before." "It's today." Klein looked at Butler Walter and said, "All right, give me 15 minutes to prepare." Then he instructed his valet, Enony, "Come in and help me change my clothes." When only he and his marionette were left in the room, he controlled the latter to bring out clothes suitable for high tea, taking glances at the wall clock from time to time. After about 10 minutes, after tying his bow tie and putting on his coat, he took 4 steps counterclockwise and headed above the grey fog. At that moment, 3 hours had passed since he last entered. Placed at the end of the long bronze table, the mutated glass bottle which had been firmly bound to the unshadowed crucifix with the grey fog's power no longer had the twinkling mesh, looking as though it went from being a piece of art to a common item on the street. At the bottom of the glass bottle was a large amount of greyish-white matter that had been purged. It flowed freely, forming a heart-shaped object the size of a child's fist. Not only were there wrinkles on it, but there were also cracks that resembled eyes. As for the complicated, three-dimensional, illusory patterns, labels, and symbols that extended into the void, they were nearly identical to Vin Rambus's beyond a characteristic that Klein had seen from before. "It's just a little different." Klein released the grey fog's suppression and took out the unshadowed crucifix from the bottle mouth. With this step, the item that was purged out was completely separated from the mutated glass bottle, becoming complete and independent. Klein reached out his left hand to pick up the item that resembled both a heart and a brain, and after examining it for a few seconds, he threw it into the junk pile and allowed the grey fog to envelop it. At this moment, a weak voice sounded from the mutated glass bottle. "You devil." Klein didn't respond as he thrust the unshadowed crucifix back in with his right hand, using the power of the grey fog to press down on it. And with that, the ancient palace returned to its tranquil state. After returning to the real world, Klein put on his top hat, held his cane, and left 160 Bockland Street on his carriage. He headed for Member of Parliament Mac's residence at Unit 39. Inside an elegant activity room at Member of Parliament Mac's house, a few guests sat around an intricate 3-tiered tray. In front of them was a cup of charming black tea. Klein took a small cucumber sandwich and took a small bite. Half-jokingly, he shared his true feelings. The desserts today seem very unique. Be it the carrot cake or cream puffs. Mac laughed when he heard that. "Dwayne, your observation skills are truly impeccable. This has nothing to do with one's observation skills. As long as one isn't blind, it's impossible not to tell that the shapes are all banged up." He lampooned silently before saying, "It sounds like something remarkable. Of course, it's personally made by Hazel. You can try it later. Although she can't control its appearance effectively, it really does taste good," Mac said proudly. By the side, Portland Moment, who was the Backland University of Technology's chancellor, laughed and said, "This doesn't sound like the Hazel I know." Mac glanced at Ma'am Rihanna and said in satisfaction, "Everyone grows up, right? Hazel has really matured recently. Not only is she willing to learn those classes in preparation for socializing and marriage that she used to hate, and occasionally makes desserts and plays music for us, but she'll also frequently offer to accompany her mother to attend musicals, horse racing matches, shop at the departmental store, and listen silently by the side at all kinds of saloons and balls. According to Miss Justice, Hazel's treatment progress has reached a point where she can recall the terrible shock and pain she had suffered. Although it's just a direct sense of the emotions and doesn't involve the exact sequence of events, it's enough to make her dream of losing her parents and relatives. This made her learn to cherish her family. For this, she has decided to change herself to a certain extent. Klein nodded in thought and said with a smile, "That's excellent." "Indeed," Mac replied while full of emotion. "I was worried about her personality, worried that she wouldn't have a good marriage and be unable to date people in our circle. After we pass away, she wouldn't be able to find help when faced with difficulties. But now, I can finally feel at ease." Mac revealed a sincere smile as he revealed his worries that he seldom divulged. He raised his arm and waved it gently. Then he said with great confidence, "Why am I making an enemy out of the bloody smog and pollution? Why do we have to fight over the colonies in East Balam with Fazak and the West Balam with Intis? Isn't it to let our children lead a better life? So that we have fewer worries? To me, Hazel's maturity is greater than the contributions I made at East Balam, far more meaningful than my fights in the House of Commons." As Klein listened to Mac's recount, he couldn't help but look out the window. It was dark outside and the sun was gone. At this moment, Portland Moment replied to Mac jokingly, "No, those things are for our own good." At this point, he looked at Klein and said, "Dwayne, have you thought about it? Do you want to invest in my mechanical laboratory?" Klein let out a soft chuckle. "Mr. Chancellor, why are you still so anxious like a young man? I've already read through the information you gave me and have a rough impression of the rights and revenue. Frankly speaking, I'm very interested. To let talented young adults obtain training at such a mechanical laboratory is greatly satisfying. This should be something we invest in. What's most valuable in this day and age? Talents. Emperor Roselle once said that." Portland Moment chuckled. "So, how much do you intend to invest?" Dwayne raised his porcelain cup and drank a mouthful of black tea. "The initial plan is £10,000. As expected of the most famous tycoon in Backland recently. I can't even guess how many assets you have. First, you donated more than £10,000 of shares, then you spent £20,000 buying Mega Manor, and now you're donating £10,000 to the Portland Mechanical Laboratory." Ma'am Rihanna couldn't help but exclaim. Portland Moment gave a thumbs up. "This is a truly keen investor." Klein smiled and said, "But I'll still find a team formed by lawyers and accountants to verify the actual situation and stipulate the conditions. Professional matters should be left to the professionals. Besides, I still have to consider investing directly or first establish a company or foundation and complete the investment through it. Oh, Portland, I think there's one aspect that you didn't take into consideration. How can such an important laboratory not have any security measures? Aren't you afraid of commercial spies or foreign powers infiltrating and causing destruction?" Portland Moment was taken aback as he slowly nodded. "That makes sense. I previously neglected this problem." Having accomplished his goal, Klein no longer harped on the topic. Instead, he deliberately asked, "Has there been news regarding Brigadier General Conas Kilgore?" Mac sighed and said, "No, Civelhouse Yard said that Mega Manor and the surrounding areas have been searched. They didn't even find any leads." As he spoke, the House of Commons Member of Parliament lowered his voice and said, "I suspect that the Brigadier General had an accident while carrying out a secret mission. The current mood of the higher-ups has been a little strange. From a certain point of view, you guessed right." Klein sighed. "I hope nothing happens." Amidst high tea, Klein took note of the time and went to the bathroom. Above the grey fog, he placed the Dreamwalker characteristic into the junk pile that seeped out of the mutated bottle. By the time high tea ended and he returned to 160 Bockland Street, the sky had already darkened. The street lamps on both sides of the road were lit up ahead of time as the rain pattered down the carriage windows. Now, all the questions are concentrated on what's hidden in the Blood Emperor's ruins. As long as the three churches discover the problem in time, they can prevent many things from happening. Klein looked out at the street lamps that looked blurry from the rain as he considered the recent developments. For now, apart from capturing Katerina, I can't provide much help. Furthermore, the goddess is digesting or controlling death's uniqueness. She might not have the power to provide a response at that level. To solve this problem, I either get a Grade 0 sealed artifact with a targeted effect from the Holy Cathedral, or I rely on the Church of Steam and Storms and see which one of the true deities will respond. A Grade 0 sealed artifact might not be enough since it involves a King of Angels, and there might be traitors amidst the two churches. Traveling from 39 Bockland Street to Unit 160 didn't take long. Before Klein could straighten out his thoughts, he had already returned to his doorstep. He had no choice but to get off the carriage. When he changed his clothes on the third floor, his spiritual perception was triggered. He saw Rionette Tinnicker walk out of the void with 4 blonde, red-eyed heads in hand. "It's from Sharon." A guess came to him as he received the letter. "That's right," one of the heads held by Rionette Tinnicker replied. Without another word, Klein opened the envelope and unfurled the piece of paper. There was only one line on it: "We'll take action at 10 tonight." Tonight at 10. Looking at Miss Messenger, who stayed in place, Klein walked to the desk and wrote, "I'll be on time." In addition, the situation in Backland has become tense recently. Make sure to keep the matter under control. After reminding Sharon, Klein folded the letter and took out a gold coin in a rectangular diamond that kept refracting light. This is a yesterday once more charm. It can allow you to temporarily borrow powers from your past self. Klein handed the 3 items to Rionette Tinnicker. One of the blonde, red-eyed heads in Rionette Tinnicker's hands opened its mouth and bit down on everything. The remaining 3 said, "Why? Give me, count it as part of the remuneration I'll be paying in advance," Klein said with an ordinary smile. A Rhodes's reminder made him feel that it was imperative to make more preparations. Rionette Tinnicker didn't ask further. The 4 beautiful heads bobbed up and down from their hair as though they were nodding. She then stepped into the void and vanished from the room. Looking at the light rain and the dark sky outside the window, Klein took off his coat and handed it to his valet, Enemy. 9:50 p.m., on a street near the Tussock River in Sherwood Borough. In the commonly seen autumn-winter rain in Backland, a rental carriage turned in and slowly moved forward. On the carriage, the red-eyed Emlyn White, who was holding a top hat in his hand, looked at the young man with pale looks and disheveled hair before curling his lips. "Is it here?" The incorporeal figure, Marie, nodded. He pointed to a neighboring building diagonally across at the shops over there and said, "That's right. That's a bookstore. The owner's name is Charlie Raker and is pure Loanese. However, he went to the southern continent once when he was young, hoping to become a tycoon. There, he became a member of the Rose School of Thought and a believer of the Chained God. He was later sent back to Backland and was made to gather intelligence, as well as provide assistance to the other Rose School of Thought members who are executing other missions. We've been watching him for a while and wish to finish him off and sever the source of intel for the Rose School of Thought so that we can create a better living environment for ourselves. However, we ultimately held back." Emlyn smiled and said, "The facts have proven that tolerance can indeed be exchanged for better results. Hey, to be honest, your performance is quite different from what I imagined for a temperance faction wraith. I thought you would be very terse." Marie glanced at the vampire who was already a viscount. Different people have different personalities. And temperance is only meant to control excessive desires. I'm afraid you wouldn't understand and that it would affect the final result of the mission if I didn't explain this matter too clearly. That way, the desires that need temperance will exceed the limits of what it should be. Hey, although it's very philosophical, there's no need to use me as an example." Emlyn leisurely leaned against the wall and looked at him. "Continue with the previous topic." Marie looked out the window again. In Charlie Raker's house is a female servant from the Paz Valley. She's also a member of the Rose School of Thought. In addition, in the 2 houses diagonally opposite to Raker's house lives a widow and a male alcoholic. They're believers of the Chained God, and they would transmit information to the Rose School of Thought at critical moments. The thing you need to do is to secretly monitor these 3 people while we're dealing with Charlie Raker. Through the information sent, you'll be able to lock onto the person in charge of the Rose School of Thought in Backland. Of course, we'll definitely give Charlie Raker some opportunity to seek help or send out a signal." Emlyn nodded slightly and said, "I understand." He then turned his head to look at the sky, which had dark clouds that blanketed it, blocking out the crimson moon. He turned the ring with the ghostly blue gem on his ring finger. This was the Oath of Rose ring. It allowed Earl Mistral to share his sense of sight, hearing, and smell. This ring went around one big circle and ended up back in Emlyn's hands. Of course, it was only temporary. As such, Earl Mistral had already heard what Marie had said and shared it with the other sanguine participants. Emlyn originally believed that although he was only the intermediary who was in charge of communication and didn't play an important role, even if that were the case, he felt that he was able to showcase some of his spells as a Scarlet Scholar, allowing him to pass the information in a really cool and elevated manner in front of Wraith Marie. To his surprise, he didn't need to do anything. All he needed was to be on scene wearing the ring. This made him very depressed. He felt that he was purely a tool. Without being a demigod, I'm not qualified to directly participate in many things, much less to save the race. At that moment, Emlyn felt a little impulsive. He felt that his level wasn't worthy of his secret identity and that he was unable to bear the responsibilities he needed to bear. As for the Oath of Rose's effect of being able to allow the thoughts of the two wearers to appear in the minds of the other party from time to time, Emlyn wasn't worried. He had asked Miss Justice to hypnotize him so that he wouldn't think about matters that he didn't want the sanguine upper echelons from knowing tonight. Just as he had this thought, he suddenly heard Earl Mistral's voice, arrogant, childish, naive. This is a particular thought of Earl Mistral that was transmitted by Oath of Rose. Hey! Emlyn scoffed inwardly as he began chanting a name, Ernst Boyar. Ernst Boyar. This Viscount had been hypnotized under the protection of Earl Mistral and had been volunteering at the Harvest Church for a long time. At that moment, Marie glanced at Emlyn's expression and nodded. Your current attitude is reassuring. Very serious, very solemn, and very focused. Ah. Emlyn was first taken aback before he curled his lips slightly. Thank you. The second floor of the bookstore was Charlie Raker's house. This businessman was over 50 years old, and his parents had long passed away. Despite being never married, rumors had it that he had a few illegitimate children, but none of them lived with him. After instructing the servants to check if the house's windows were locked, he returned to his bedroom and poured himself a cup of red wine. He sat on the sofa and savored it in a relaxed manner. He was used to drinking some wine before sleeping. When he finished the red wine, Charlie Raker stood up and walked towards the bathroom. When he passed by the full-body mirror in the bedroom, he casually took a glance, and his body suddenly froze up. In the mirror, his face had unknowingly turned abnormally pale. His eyes were protruded, and blood was seeping from the edges. The corners of his lips were slightly red. As a member of the Rose School of Thought, Charlie Raker wasn't unfamiliar with such a situation. He didn't scream or run recklessly like ordinary people. Instead, he raised his right hand and extended it to his chest. Just as he touched the accessory he was wearing, his body felt like it had fallen into an unmeltable icy abyss. It was cold from the inside to the outside. The cold seemed to have a life force of its own as it expanded rapidly and covered every corner of Charlie Raker's body. It made him feel like his joints and muscles no longer belonged to him as they began to abide by the commands of others. At that moment, it was as if there was another person in his body. It was cold and blurry, filled with malice. It directly took over everything other than his thoughts. At the same time, Charlie Raker saw new changes to his body in the mirror. Two figures appeared in his eyes. One was a young man in a white shirt and black vest. With his right hand having made contact with the object at his chest, a bright light flashed in front of him. The light seemed to come from a miniature sun, casting light and heat in every direction. Charlie Raker immediately felt warmth and was no longer controlled by the cold in his body. He blurted out a word, cleanse. The miniature sun in front of his chest burned intensely. It was like warm water that surged into his chest, forming ripples. With that, Charlie Raker regained control of his body and gave up on the door. Instead, he ran towards the window. The curtain wasn't drawn, and it was drizzling outside, dimming the street lights outside. Tap, tap, tap. When Charlie Raker walked past the carpeted coffee table area, he suddenly stumbled and nearly fell. The carpet seemed to come alive as it wrapped around his ankles. Bang! The coffee table flew up, and the porcelain teacup and all sorts of documents landed on Charlie Raker's face. It shattered to pieces, turning into a strange dismembered puppet. Suddenly, Charlie Raker's figure appeared elsewhere as he continued running with a sense of fear lingering in his heart. He had never hated his bedroom for being this big before. Tap, tap, tap. Fountain pens shot randomly, and paper swatted around as Charlie Raker finally ran to the window. As a devout believer, he didn't break out of the window immediately. Instead, he held the curtain and pulled it. At the same time, he pressed his other hand onto the gas pipe. A layer of white frost instantly formed on the black metal surface. Crack! The glass window in front of Charlie Raker shattered as every piece of glass flew out like a bullet and hit the merchant's face, piercing through his perfectly fine skin. It caused blood to gush out at his neck. Charlie Raker's eyes darkened, and he fell back weakly. During this process, he screamed and yelled, but his voice couldn't be heard beyond the room. At this moment, in another room, a maid from the southern continent could clearly see the light from the gas wall lamps shaking. She immediately turned her head and looked towards where her employer was, only to see that the gas pipes there were covered in white frost. In a house opposite to Charlie Raker, the brandy-nosed man, who had rolled up sleeves and gulping down alcohol, suddenly noticed that the curtains were only half closed. For the secret signal that he and Charlie Raker had agreed upon, having the curtains completely drawn meant that there wasn't a problem. Having half the curtains drawn or only one side meant an emergency situation. It required him to inform the higher-ups immediately. He abruptly stood up. The red brandy-nosed man rushed to a safe within a few steps, where he then took out a radio transceiver and a codebook from a secret compartment. He crouched there and transcoded the incident that happened to Charlie Raker. Then, he started to send the telegram. Meanwhile, in the house above the Raker bookstore, a brown-skinned maid rolled up her sleeves and poured an indigo-blue liquid on her left arm. Her skin around the spot immediately changed colors, but under the indigo-blue colors, there were wisps of black light extending out like threadworms. These black beams of light quickly manifested a strange, palm-sized face. Its eyes were as tiny as rice grains, and its mouth was as wide as a tea plate. "Charlie Raker has had an accident," the maid enunciated each word while looking at the face on her arm. Every word she said seemed to have its own shape, forming an indigo-blue-bodied entity like her mouth and arm. Immediately following that, the words that seemed to be written began to intertwine as they were enveloped by smoke of the same color. At this moment, the strange face on the maid's arm slowly opened its mouth and sucked in the indigo-blue smoke and text. All the abnormalities vanished, other than the patch of skin on the maid's arm remaining an indigo-blue color. In the darkness outside the window, a tiny, ordinary bat flapped its wings, changing its motionless state and flying off to some unknown location. On another street that was less than 500 meters away from the Raker's bookstore, in the air above a restaurant that specialized in southern continent cuisine, tiny bats flew out from the darkness and gathered together, forming thick smoke. The smoke and bat appeared incorporeal and disappeared in the blink of an eye. All that was left behind was a man wearing a tuxedo without the corresponding hat. This man was thin, tall, and upright. He had light-colored hair that was nearly silver in color. His eyes were bright red like blood, as though blood was hidden within. He was none other than Sanguine Earl Mistral. He raised his left hand with the ghostly blue gem ring and touched the slightly exaggerated bow tie. He looked down at the restaurant that had already closed and said, "Both pieces of intel eventually led here." As soon as Mistral finished speaking, a figure appeared in front of him, wearing a black regal dress and a bonnet. She had light blonde hair and blue eyes, and her face was pale like a rather intricate doll. The trees on the street below suddenly swayed gently as the light from the gas lamps flashed. "A puppet." Earl Mistral nodded slightly and acknowledged Sharon's status and level. Sharon ignored him and looked at the second floor of the restaurant. "There are remnants of Mother Tree of Desire worship. Then there's no problem." Mistral turned around in midair and nodded towards the darkest area. "Lord Nibs, please seal this place." An elderly, deep sigh sounded before a pair of wings covered in dark-colored skin and countless patterns suddenly extended out of the darkness. It extended out, turning broader and bigger, taking 2 to 3 seconds to envelop the entire area. The restaurant sank into an unnatural state of darkness, as though it had been moved out of the real world. Mistral didn't hesitate, nor did he attack directly. He took out a bronze box embedded with many ruby gems and took out something from it. It was a transparent glass sphere that resembled an eyeball. Then, the Sanguine Earl Mistral grimaced as the glass sphere fell from his fingers and landed downwards. The glass sphere emitted a glint in the darkness as it constantly changed directions and moved towards something in the air as though it was being attracted by something. Finally, it landed in a room on the second floor of the restaurant. A dazzling white light exploded. It was as if a sun had risen in the room, illuminating everything. It made all the corruption, decadence, evil, undeath, and darkness rapidly melt away. Mistral, who had already closed his eyes, suddenly frowned and let out a puzzled voice. He didn't feel any resistance from that restaurant. Sharon, who looked down from above, leveled her gaze. Although there wasn't much of a change in her expression, her tightly bound blonde hair seemed to shake a little. After the sun rose, it quickly set. The bright white light shone helplessly and silently in the darkness. As this was an item that was targeted at evil spirits, the building in the restaurant didn't suffer any damage. The sanguine Earl, Mistral, opened his eyes and looked at it for 2 seconds before reaching up with his right hand and clenching it. The darkness above the restaurant instantly came to life, transforming into illusory chains that bound the entire roof. Amidst the jarring sounds, the roof was forcibly uprooted and suspended in midair. Without this obstacle, be it Mistral or Sharon, they could clearly see the situation in the target's room. On a square table covered in table linen, a radio transceiver sat on it with a transcoded telegram message beside it. In contrast, the ground was indigo blue and charred. On the other side of the room, there was an old piano. The piano stools were brown in color and seemed to have been moved moments ago. On the piano, there was a cup of red wine. There was a small, sticky, flesh-colored figure soaked inside. As for the decorations and layout, it was like any normal residence. The only difference was herbal powder and essential oil extract splattered around. This made Sharon, who could directly obtain information from the spirit world, have a thought: the person here had just left. Before she, along with Earl Mistral and Marquis Nibs, could react, the flesh-colored figure soaked in red wine emitted a misty glow. The light instantly burgeoned and brightened, forming a gigantic, crimson moon, in the room. The crimson moon's glow dispersed the darkness of the region, making the demigod participating in the battle feel as though they were on the ground and looking up into the sky. Sharon's blue eyes froze for a moment. She raised her left hand suddenly and flipped it gently, revealing a dark red accessory in her palm. The accessory looked like a full moon, and there were crimson gems embedded around it. In the center, there were symbols filled with full moons and mysterious labels. This was the Scarlet Lunar Corona which Sharon had obtained thanks to Sherlock Moriarty's help. It kept emanating a tranquil halo, imbuing the wielder with immunity to the effects of the full moon. However, the crimson moon in the restaurant wasn't something that was as simple as a full moon. It was even closer to a blood moon, or even stronger. An indescribable surge of spirituality came into existence, making the area which Nibs's gigantic wings had isolated present a strange, deeply silent feeling. Even though Sharon wielded the Scarlet Lunar Corona, she sensed the maleficent thoughts in her burgeon as though an indescribable change was brewing. She instinctively wanted to turn into an evil spirit and hide in objects like the trees and gas lamps along the streets. However, her rationality stopped her impulsive reaction because the crimson moon's illumination had no blind spots. At that moment, the sanguine Earl, Mistral, saw his stomach bulging bit by bit. He felt that the life pulsing in his veins was slowly condensing as though making an attempt to take form. As a supernatural creature that could use the power of the moon, he hadn't prepared to eliminate the effects of a blood moon. He originally believed that he would be filled with joy in such an environment, allowing him to freely show his prowess, but he never expected the abnormal changes to far exceed his expectations. He felt that if this continued, he would give birth to new life. It was unknown where this terrifying vileness stemmed from. The authority of the moon included fertility and proliferation. At the same time, from the huge bat wings that isolated the surroundings and created darkness, white fur grew out in an extremely harrowing manner. Nibs grunted softly as cracks appeared in the sealed-off area. A few streets away, aboard Emlyn White was rubbing the blue gem-inlaid Oath of Rose. It was at this moment, Emlyn suddenly obtained the senses of Earl Mistral, seeing and hearing what he could. The feelings and thoughts that belonged to Earl Mistral were transmitted into Emlyn's mind after a long period of time. He sat up straight in fright. His expression distorted as his stomach churned, feeling the urge to vomit. With the help of creeping hunger, Klein's actual body was hiding in the shadows outside the restaurant, but the marionette he controlled, Conas Kilgore, had already hidden into the darkness created by Nibs and used distortion to circumvent the isolation, staying within range of his control of the spirit body threads. At that moment, under the illusory crimson moon's illumination, he was surprised to discover that his marionette, which was intrinsically dead, had an inclination towards reproducing. And that new life was definitely the offspring of the mother tree of desire. This is sanguine ancestor Lilith as mentioned in the legends of the City of Silver, as well as the manifestation of the primordial moon which Emlyn has mentioned before. Indeed, the Mother Tree of Desire has already grasped a portion of the moon's authority and has corrupted it into an especially evil state, far more than it originally was. Klein was just about to swap locations with his marionette and enter the region illuminated by the crimson moon and teleport away with Miss Sharon when he felt an indescribable sense of joy within him. It was the joy of seeing a flower in his garden slowly bloom after a long night amidst the morning fog. It was the joy from leaving the city and heading to the suburbs, taking in fresh air in a forest after the rain, watching mushrooms grow. It was the joy of seeing everything grow healthily with new life descending upon the world. The white fur on the huge bat wings fell off completely as Earl Mistral's protruding belly shrank back. The look in Sharon's eyes, who struggled to hold on to Scarlet Luna Corona, seemed to relax. Right on the heels of that, the crimson moon in the restaurant quickly dimmed, as if large amounts of light had been sucked away by someone. Finally, the crimson moon vanished and everything returned to normal. Did Sanguine Duke Olma take action? Klein nodded thoughtfully and continued hiding in the shadows. Mistral restrained his anger and looked down at the dining room. He said in a low voice, "The target seems to have detected something ahead of time. It wasn't that much earlier." Combining the present situation and the revelations obtained from the spirit world, Sharon gave her answer. Mistral's bright red eyes revealed a strange glint as he observed for a few seconds before saying, "It was almost at the moment we came over when the person left, the person who left behind the glass of red wine and the strange puppet. This trap doesn't look like it was prepared. It's closer to a last-minute setup." Upon saying that, Mistral looked at Sharon and said, "How did they detect danger in such a timely manner?" Sharon's expression was calm as she replied, "It's not because of the Mother Tree of Desire. This evil god wasn't capable of infusing too much energy into reality, making it difficult for her to send any preemptive warnings." The sanguine Earl, Mistral, frowned slightly. Although he was unwilling to admit it, he said rather honestly, "I don't think there were any leaks prior to this. Because if that was the case, the Rose School of Thought's demigods would have had plenty of time to use the response from the Mother Tree of Desire and Abomination Sewer, laying a more dangerous and terrifying trap. It wouldn't be something an angel could easily resolve." This was also the reason why Mistral had said that the trap appeared to be a last-minute setup and looked rather hasty. This proved that there was no mole. After all, the ones who knew of the operation before tonight were the ones involved. If they wanted to leak the information, they could have done it earlier. This was unless someone changed their minds or wanted to use the urgency of time to obtain more benefits. And all of these would only leave clear traces. The black-bonneted Sharon continued looking at the restaurant that had lost its roof. After a moment of silence, she said, "Perhaps it's a way of detecting danger via other means. For this operation, the Sanguine had used a sealed artifact that could even disrupt a devil's danger premonition, much less things like spiritual intuition." Possibly, Mistral couldn't think of a better explanation. At that moment, in a room on the second floor of the restaurant, other than the red wine and strange figure evaporating, everything else remained untouched, as if nothing had happened. Originally, Sharon and Mistral could attempt using divination to find answers to their questions and restore what had happened before the attack. But now, they couldn't do so because the surrounding area had been illuminated by the crimson moon. It was equivalent to receiving the corresponding cleansing from the Mother Tree of Desire. This meant that divination easily led to this evil goddess, and the results would be unimaginable. Without waiting for Sharon to speak, Mistral took a silent deep breath and said, "There are incidents in every matter. There's no such thing as a 100% success rate. Let's leave it here today. If we stay here any longer, the officials might discover something amiss." As soon as he said that, the black chains hanging from the roof instantly turned dim and illusory. The roof descended once again, covering the second floor of the restaurant and looking no different from what it was like before. Of course, when the storm rained, there would definitely be water leaks. If there was a storm, the entire roof would be thrown up again. The gigantic bat wings that blanketed the area shrank back into the darkness as the drizzle once again took center stage. Hidden in the shadows, Klein watched as Miss Sharon's figure rapidly turned transparent and vanished. He saw an illusory cloud of smoke puffing up and countless tiny bats flying in every direction. He couldn't help but frown and silently mutter to himself, what exactly happened? It wasn't worrisome to have an accident. What was worrisome was not even knowing what the accident was. Regardless of what one's level was, the unknown was always frightening. At that moment, he suddenly heard a staccato voice. What, exactly, happened here? When Klein turned his head, he realized that Miss Messenger had walked out of the spirit world at some point in time, standing alongside him. The four blonde, red-eyed heads in her hands were all trained at the restaurant. "Can you see what happened here earlier?" Klein asked hesitantly. After the mutant pathway reached the Wraith stage, the Beyonder was free to enter and exit the spirit world, allowing them to receive revelations from there directly. Be it their spiritual intuition or divination, they were rather formidable at that. A corresponding sequence 2 angel was definitely powerful in such aspects, therefore, Klein posed the question. The 4 heads held by Rionette Tineke shook as they said in unison, "No." Klein nodded thoughtfully. Without further questions, he controlled his marionette to leave the area. Emlyn White, who had retched for a while, rubbed the ring that was embedded with a ghostly blue gem. He muttered to himself in surprise, "It ended just like that." Through the Oath of Rose, he could sense Earl Mistral's frustration, anger, and reluctance to vent his anger at a lady or others. His initial judgment was that the operation had failed because of an accident. "It's over." Upon hearing his words, Marie was equally stunned. He had actually wanted to ask Emlyn White the reason for his sudden nausea and grimace, but he had perfectly tempered his curiosity and restrained his urge. They didn't find the target. Emlyn tried his best to recall what Earl Mistral had seen and heard, but due to the seal by Marquis Nibs, he was only able to see the situation via Oath of Rose after the Crimson Moon rose. And these feelings were made ineffective quickly after the anomaly. At the same time, Emlyn mumbled inwardly, "The demigod from the Temperance faction came here while possessing a doll. Which master's work is this? It's simply art. Didn't find the target. How can that be?" Marie's brows furrowed uncontrollably. From his point of view, everything in the operation had been going smoothly up till that point in time. Whether it was him, Sharon, or the Sanguine, none of them had the motives to leak the information to the Rose School of Thought. As for Sherlock Moriarty, he had proven his credibility through numerous collaborations. Suppressing his immense disappointment and puzzlement, Marie said without much change in expression, "Then we've to leave the vicinity as quickly as possible." As soon as he said that, his figure began to fade, revealing the qualities of a wraith. Emlyn subconsciously wanted to ask him if he knew of any doll masters, but after opening his mouth, he found that it was damaging to the image of the Sanguine. Therefore, he could only swallow his words back down. "Even if I know that master, I don't have the money to buy it. To bear the burden of my mission, I have to sacrifice something. Unfortunately, we didn't capture the demigod of the Rose School of Thought this time, making it impossible to figure out the current situation of their headquarters. It'll be difficult to receive that holy artifact of the ancestor." Amidst Emlyn's thoughts, his expression slowly turned grave. Backland Bridge area, Iron Gate Street, in one of the billiard rooms of the Bravehearts Bar. Klein, in the image of Sherlock Moriarty, was sitting opposite Sharon and Marie. After a brief moment of silence, the black regal-dressed Sharon, who was seated on a high stool, said to the detective, "What are your thoughts on the matter?" Klein thought for a moment before saying, "The influence that the Crimson Moon brought was quickly destroyed." "What you mean to say is that since the Rose School of Thought's demigod had already sensed the immense danger through a certain method or a certain existence, why would he set up a trap that didn't have any effects?" Marie exchanged looks with Sharon before asking in thought. "Yes." Klein nodded. He should be able to foresee that under such dangerous circumstances, a trap at this level can be easily resolved. Then, why would he waste time setting it up and not flee immediately? This is the natural instinct of a living creature. Wearing a small bonnet, Sharon moved her head indecismably. "On the surface, it's a trap, but it's actually to cover up something." Klein replied, delivering the sentence at a slower pace, "Yes, using such a trap to cleanse the scene and stop any divination to conceal the actual situation back then. Only if there's a secret to hide would a demigod from the Rose School of Thought take the risk and stay on the scene for such a long period of time. But it's also possible that they didn't expect us to have an angel from the Sanguine to help deal with the trap," Marie suggested. Klein smiled and said, "They wouldn't ignore the angel behind you. For you to have launched a surgical strike on the concealed Rose School of Thought members in Backland, you must have defectors who know them well." He was referring to the existence of Rionette Tineke. What secret would they need to cover up? Sharon seemed to accept Klein's suspicion as she sat upright and asked. Klein shook his head. "There are too many possibilities. Perhaps they discovered the secret of the attack in time. Perhaps they were planning on plotting something in Backland." Having said that, Klein tried to consider if the Rose School of Thought was associated with the current tense situation in Backland, but he realized that there was no place for them. Be it the orthodox deities or the evil gods, they were unlikely to work with the Mother Tree of Desire. This puzzled Klein even more. He didn't know what kind of unknown accident such an unknown factor would brew. He paused for a moment as he swept his gaze across Sharon's and Marie's faces. "In short, we need to be careful and cautious. We need to avoid coming here as well." Yes, under the premise that you can ensure your own safety, try to monitor other members of the Rose School of Thought again and see if we can figure out the secret they're hiding. Thank you. Sharon's figure floated up and bowed. Marie did the same. The scarlet flames soared up as Klein vanished from his spot. According to the agreement, as he didn't have the chance to take action, the only remuneration he received was one free instance of help from Rionette Tineke. After returning to 160 Bockland Street, Klein took off his clothes and went to bed early, hoping to wake up early. Suddenly, he heard a series of illusory pleas. It was from a woman. Miss Justice. With a guess, he nodded and entered the bathroom. He took 4 steps counterclockwise and went above the grey fog. As he had expected, the supplicant was Justice Audrey. This lady had gathered £12,000 in cash, hoping that Mr. Fool could transfer it to Mr. World to complete the transaction of the Dreamwalker and Hypnotist Beyonder characteristics. Yes, if the ritual can be replaced by Angel's Embrace, Miss Justice can try to advance in the next 2 days. When that happens, it's time to place the exploration of Grosel's travels in the schedule. Hey, Leonard has already become a spirit warlock for days and has nothing to do. Klein heaved a sigh of relief and replied to Miss Justice, getting her to begin the sacrifice. With the current situation becoming more and more tense, with more and more unknown factors, he wished to strengthen himself as quickly as possible. This included many aspects. First, the increase in the number of marionettes and sealed artifacts. Second, the recovery of his helpers. And thirdly, a further grasp of knowledge and secrets. This aided him in knowing the truth and obtaining the true attitude that the different factions have, thus, finding an opportunity from within. The exploration of Grosel's travels corresponded to the third point.